There we go. So anybody, just to let you know, per AFL-CIO guidelines, we have to record any meeting that we do. So I'm gonna I don't have an official call. I don't have a gavel or anything. That'd be really cool, but I don't. So I'm gonna call this to order. Oh, hello. We're gonna constantly see. Hello, Dr. Obach. We'll get to you in 1 second here. Can somebody possibly help me and turn off cameras for people? That would be really helpful if someone on the other side could do that. Hints to everybody. Okay, check it out. I'll do it myself. There we go. Okay, Joe, if we can get this going, that'd be great. Sisters, brothers, siblings. Oh, hello there. Okay, I'm going to do this. This is fun. Zoom is fun, isn't it, everybody? I don't know where to go with this. There we go. Okay, Dr. Zabin, I'm going to take you off camera real fast. We'll see you in a bit. Great. Okay, here we are. That was fun, everybody. Zoom is a weird thing. Sisters and brothers, welcome to this year's Climate Convergence, hosted by the Alameda and Contra Costa Central Labor Council. Sadly, Executive Secretary Treasurer Liz Ortega could not join us tonight, so you're kind of stuck with me all night. I apologize. I'm sorry about that in advance. So it is my honor to welcome you to this. This is the first time that Contra Costa has been a part of this. This is the third time that Alameda has hosted this, and we're so fortunate to converge together here in the East Bay to talk about climate, talk about jobs. But before we start, let's go ahead and go through these slides if we can. Can we get to the next slide, please? Great. So a little bit of housekeeping. Again, we're going to start really officially in a minute, but okay, we're a little ahead of schedule. That's fine. To let you all know, all attendees have been placed on mute. But if you need to raise your hand, you can submit your questions like I brought up a minute ago through the chat, or you can raise your hand as well. We can go to the next slide. The Alameda and Contra Costa Central Labor Councils are committed to providing an environment free from discrimination and harassment, and we ask all meeting participants to embrace our values of equity and equality and conduct themselves in this meeting consistent with these values. So we have assigned 2 designees as the first point of contact for anyone who thinks they have experienced discriminatory, harassing, or otherwise unacceptable behavior, and we urge you to contact the designees if you have any questions about this or have any concerns. And we have that right there for you. It is myself. My email address is josh@cclabor.net, and there's my cell phone, along with Becky Rhodes from the Alameda Labor Council. You can reach her at becky@alameda.org, and there's her cell phone as well. And we'll put those in the chat for you throughout. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. So this lets you all know that Becky and Joe from the Alameda Contra Costa Labor Council will be helping with remote participation and making sure that this whole thing goes well. The event, again, with Q&A, we'll have time for that, and there's a chat icon as well. So you can use that to ask questions throughout tonight's proceedings. So we can go to the next slide. Who can you call for technical problems? Call might not be a great idea right now. The best thing would probably, I would use the chat to reach out to one of our co-hosts there, and we can make sure and troubleshoot the link for you if someone's having problems. Again, anytime you can raise your hand by clicking the raise hand icon. However, with the number of panelists and questions, we're going to try to get to as many as we can. It's always great to do put your raise hand function if you do want to speak, or to put in the chat. And then finally, one more slide, please. I think there's one more slide. Okay, this will also let you know you can unmute yourself by *6 if you're on your phone, but I think most people are on by computer. And again, use the hand raise button to be recognized. It's okay to use the chat for questions. I know I said this like 5 times, but we're trying to make sure you understand it. So next slide. Thank you. Oh, look at that. Okay, that's housekeeping. Now let's have some fun. So it is my pleasure. I think I'm turning this over to Zilali from the Alameda Labor Council. Zilali?
Yes. Okay, I don't know if my video is up. No. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the 2021 Labor Climate Convergence. Tonight's convergence is hosted by the Alameda and Contra Costa Labor Council.
Hey, Zilali, we don't have you on camera. We can't even see it.
Let's see. I need permission.
Oh, there you go.
There I am. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the 2021 Labor Climate Convergence. Tonight's convergence is hosted by the Alameda and Contra Costa Labor Councils. My name is Ticlani Sanchez. I'm a proud member of Unite Here, Local 2850, and I serve on our executive committee board. I am also one of the co-chairs for the Alameda Labor Council's Climate Caucus. Our program tonight will bring together labor and the environmental justice community for discussion and dialogue about the challenges of climate change. Labor needs to establish a unified front on environmental issues that uplift workers across the movement, overcoming both climate change and our rising inequalities. We see tremendous opportunity to build a strong regional coalition with our labor and community allies. We know that we are stronger when we are united in this fight. Which brings us here tonight. I will now turn it over to the Executive Director of Contra Costa Labor Council, Josh Anajar.
Hey everybody, it's me again. Long time no talk. I'm sorry that you're talk to me again, but everyone look, tonight is gonna be the chance for labor to talk about this existential crisis that we face right now with climate change, how it affects the future of work, our movement, our communities. Tonight is about making sure that workers have a seat at the table to chart out our economic future, right? To chart out, to make sure that like the green economy doesn't repeat the same mistakes that so many industries have made in the past in terms of respecting workers and making sure that they have a decent living and earn a decent wage through their work. On top of this is making sure that that communities have clean air, water, and an environment that, you know, that the rich shouldn't be the only ones that have these things. Everyone should have access to clean water. Everyone should have access to clean air. This is the good news though. The good news is our movement can meet these challenges. Look, we're gonna look just to our own movement. Look, the Teamsters, their logo are still horses. I don't see Teamsters driving a lot of horses anymore, but they're still as powerful as ever because they adapted with their industries. We have to think about how we evolve. And this evolution can only happen with dialogue, talking with each other, not at each other, trying to understand each other's point of views from a place of respect and a place from the labor movement. You know, tonight's gonna be a hard night. It's gonna be a lot of us taking risks, listening, hearing. I think it's important for us all. Because our goal is to make sure that everyone can prosper in creating generational wealth and making sure that there are good paying union jobs that heal our planet and make sure that we don't continue towards this basically an extinction level event that's right at our doorsteps right now. So instead of hearing completely from me, I'm gonna turn this back over. Oh, wait, hold on, I got one more thing. So listen, you're gonna hear from a lot of range of people tonight. You're gonna hear from a lot of diverse views, from professors, from powerful voices within the labor movement, within community partners. We're so excited that you're here. So sit back, get comfy, relax. You're in for a great show. And know that we're doing this on Zoom. It's a weird time. We wish we could all be in person together, but we're gonna make this work tonight as best as we can, as safe as we can. We're glad that you're here and that you're safe and that you're with us in your homes. So with that, I'm gonna turn this back over to Zilali to start with our next presentation.
So as we face the crisis of climate change, workers are among those most affected, whether due to the threat of losing their jobs and livelihood, or because they work on the front lines themselves, experiencing pollution and the various effects of climate change, including wildfires. Our members come from across all sectors of the economy and all walks of life, and have real stakes in the environmental struggle. We will now play a video.
Hi, my name is Tracy Scott. I'm the president of USW Local 5, and I'm also a staff representative for our membership at the Marathon Petroleum Refinery in Martinez.
My name is Nathaniel Arnold, and I've been employed with AC Transit for 12 years. I'm a bus operator, and I am the safety chair for the union.
Hi, I'm Brianna McGuire, and I'm a member and zone contact in UPD CWA 9119 Local 6.
My name is Cheryl Mann. I am out of the IBEW Local 595.
I work for the UC, which is one of the state's largest employers. And I work in a lab that studies plant diseases. So I witness climate change. I see farm workers in distress, and I see the economics of farming certain crops in certain parts of the state changing over time.
Getting people where they need to be by reducing that carbon footprint is of the utmost importance for all of us.
What we really need at the institutional level is a generous and equitable just transition for our existing fossil fuel workers and a truly carbon-free UC system.
We have the second largest bus fleet in the world for zero emissions buses.
They have the means to do it now. I think it's dire actually to do it.
And brothers and sisters, it is my belief that after the sudden closure of the Marathon refinery and chemical plant and 350 people losing their jobs, that we need to actively participate in the discussion around the transition taking place in the state of California, and that we need to be at the tables where the equitable treatment of fossil fuel workers are being discussed, especially if the potential outcome is that they may be laid off due to the changes being considered, and that there should be a safety net to bridge the gap in the public energy policy. I'm certain that our participation in the Contra Costa and Alameda Labor Council's Climate Convergence Conference is essential and valuable. In solidarity.
As you saw in the video, workers are faced both with the perils and opportunities of a changing world. We saw this firsthand in Contra Costa County this year with the closing, last year rather, with Marathon shutting down at the beginning of the COVID crisis. I would like to introduce our first panel. We're going to have a few speakers in just a second. These workers and union members are from many of the professions and jobs either during recent closings or on the front line in serving the times of emergency. Made all the times of emergency made worse by climate change. And we were going to have a full panel. Just to let you know, I even had this great joke about which mask to wear, because we were going to have which apocalypse, because we were going to have a firefighter speak about the uncontrollable fires in California right now. Sadly, they weren't able to make it, but I'm so excited to the panel that we have here. Also, I noticed that everyone keeps introing themselves and putting their unions in the chat and where they're from. Please keep that up. That's awesome. It's great to see it go. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first panel. With us is Amy Scott-Slovick from the California Nurses Association, and I'll have her introduce herself and let her tell her story. Then also we'll be hearing from Samantha Scott from USW 5, the steelworkers. We'll be hearing from her afterwards. So Amy, welcome. We're so excited to have you at the Climate Convergence. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm glad we've got such a great turnout. So I'm a nurse a registered nurse with the California Nurses Association. I've been a nurse in this area for about 23 years. Actually, the entire time it's been in Contra Costa County and a little bit of East Bay. So the way our members have really been affected by climate change have been predominantly because of the extreme weather events. I would say well, I'll tell you one other thing. Right now, I am a chronic conditions case manager, and I work with folks largely that have, pretty out of control COPD, congestive heart failure, and the majority of my patients are also kind of living in poverty and in areas where they have where they're very low income, like Medi-Cal and on Medicare. So in the population that I've been working with, what I've been seeing over the years is, it used to be famous that, January, February, March was like, oh, everyone goes into breathing distress during that time because of how bad the, flu starts to happen and that kind of stuff. What we're seeing now is that it's actually more July, August, and September, and it's usually related to smoke. That's actually getting a higher amount of people showing up in the hospital. And the amount of people that we have now that have COPD and needing this case management, our levels just keep going up and up and up. Another thing I would say about that is with the fires, especially in the North Bay this past couple of years, we actually had to evacuate a couple of hospitals, and we had nurses there trying to get these patients out of a hospital because the hospital, was starting to catch on fire. They needed to evacuate them. And at that same time, those same members were losing their homes while they were trying to save their patients. Along with that, I would also say that, when we have these big weather events, it can also have problems with like the supply chain. So often it's a matter of not being able to get people on medications or shortages because of where things have to get shipped from. When we've had hurricanes or fires, it really can make a big difference in people being able to get what they need. The rolling power outages for our patients that are on oxygen, or our patients that are in hospital beds, electric hospital beds, but are, they're dependent on having electricity to have those things work. Often will end people suddenly back in the hospital because they're not safe at home without power. We also, along with that, that with the fires, we've had to use up so many N95s over the last couple of years. And so when this COVID kind of hit, one of the reasons we were so short on N95s was because of how many had been used up because of the fires. So it really impacted our workers who did not have the PPE that they needed. And many healthcare workers got ill, and we lost many. And then also it's a matter of just spreading it then among hospitals because people didn't have the correct PPE. So that's been a big thing to kind of deal with. And I guess the last thing maybe I would say is in the areas the people that I case manage, I've noticed that there seems to be significantly larger amounts of patients with the COPD and asthma and ending up in the hospital with exacerbations from that in areas that were largely around West County. We have much higher caseloads. In Martinez, we have high caseloads, and out like in the Bay Point and Pittsburgh area, we have high caseloads. And there's definite concern about the pollution that's happening in those areas and these people that are being exposed. So I'm really looking forward to us working together and coming up with some ideas about how to help with the just transition and also, make sure that we're taking care of the public health of this area. Thanks.
Amy, thank you. And I didn't get a chance to say this in the beginning. First off, thank you for everything that you've done. And every nurse for the last year, for the crisis that you all have experienced, for the work that you all have done. And thank you for the work that you do every day, regardless of the pandemic. Administering care is difficult and it's hard. Some of the hardest work that you can have in this country. And we're just so proud of you and thank you for sharing your story. We'll see if we have time for Q&A, but I want to continue to move on to Samantha Scott. Sam is a proud member of was with the United Steelworkers, Local 5, and based in Martinez, and worked in the Marathon Refinery in Martinez. I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let Sam take it from here. Sister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Josh. Hi, everybody. I'm so honored to be here tonight speaking on the experience that I went through. As Josh said, my name is Sam Scott, actually Sam Scott West, now that I'm married. And up until last October, I was a second generation Bay Area oil worker. I had worked at the Marathon Refinery for almost 11 years. And in that time, I was a very active member of the United Steelworkers Union, serving 5 years on the contract bargaining committee and 3 years as the recording secretary at the Union Hall. As I said, second generation. My dad worked at the refinery starting in 2001, around the time I was 16, and it changed our lives going forward from that point. I remember having great benefits all of a sudden, and there just generally seemed to be less tension about money in our lives. My teenage understanding of all that was pretty basic, but there was a definite difference in our lives before and after my dad started working at the refinery. It was a step change kind of job from the work that he had had previously. So in 2009, I was working for a unionized grocery store, and my dad told me that the refinery was hiring a new class of operator trainees. By that time, I also had 3 other relatives working out there. All but one of us would go on to be displaced by Marathon's decision to indefinitely idle the plant. So the hiring process itself was rigorous. It took over 6 months from application to start date, and it took over 1,700 initial applicants down to the 20 people they hired in my hiring class. That was a process they would go through often once and occasionally 2 times a year, just to give you an idea of the scope and scale of the interest in jobs like that and the number of people they were hiring on any given yearly basis to be an operator. My hiring class came from a lot of different backgrounds. Like I said, was a grocery clerk. We had auto mechanics and Air Force retirees, steel workers out of the local steel mill, a restaurant server and a manager at Target, among others. We came from all backgrounds and all walks of life. So once we were hired, we did 2 months of classroom training and field training on the refinery basics, including 40 hours of industrial fire response training and 40 hours of training to certify as hazardous waste operators through the OSHA HAZWOPER training program. The rest of our training occurred once we were assigned to our operating unit. I myself worked on a unit that made products to be sold that included diesel and gasoline, as well as other products that were used in the refinery for fuel gas, things like propane and butane. I eventually trained and qualified on 4 positions and rotated equally among them. When I worked in the field, the outside job, I was responsible for monitoring large pieces of rotating equipment, as well as large furnaces, steam boilers, and more. I learned to safely prepare equipment for maintenance, to troubleshoot and react to abnormal field conditions, and to shut any or all of it down quickly and safely when needed. I also learned how to manage how the unit was running by qualifying on 2 different control boards that included a lot of advanced controls and data points. Temperatures, pressures, liquid levels, flow rates, all needed to be monitored and adjusted to keep everything running safely and smoothly. Part of qualifying on each position was memorizing the initial steps to react to a lot of different possible emergencies, including things like losing electricity, losing the oil coming into the unit, finding a leak on a piece of equipment, or even a fire on my unit. I continued throughout my career to train and requalify on every aspect of the job, as did all of my coworkers. I mentioned the training in such detail because with all of the training and qualifications that we went through at Marathon, no matter what industry we had come from, it gave us a really marketable skill set. While there are a limited number of refineries and refinery jobs in the Bay Area and may continue to decrease over time, the troubleshooting, the control, and the maintenance preparation we learned there can apply in a lot of different industries. After the indefinite idling, where Marathon transitioned to being just a shipping terminal, some folks went to work for PG&E, for wastewater or water distribution for cities and counties, manufacturing at places like Tesla and Budweiser. There were some issues in getting hired in those kind of jobs after the indefinite idling. First was that there were so many of us going for the same positions based on our skills that we found ourselves competing against former coworkers for few local positions. The second issue was that for some who were applying to positions, they were being asked how they could verify all the training and qualifications they had earned at Marathon. In some cases, it was easy because things like fire training and hazmat training are certified through outside agencies. But for our job-specific training, the daily tasks and skills and experience that we had built up at our time at Marathon, it was only verified with Marathon records. There wasn't a standardized qualification from one unit to another, and the documents that indicated our training and refresher progress were not easily understood outside the refining industry. That means that some folks going through the hiring process at different places weren't able to fully capitalize on their work experience at Marathon, even those who had 25 or more years careers behind them. For the operators in the refinery work was shift work. It was rotating from days to nights and back to days, just after a set of days off. There was also overtime, some of which was optional and some of which was forced. Because of the long and changing shifts, many refinery workers who had families would have a spouse who worked a more flexible job or stayed home to manage the family schedule and the day-to-day management of a busy household. So the indefinite idling was in many cases a near complete blow to the family finances. Folks were facing the reality of job loss and often the urgency of finding a new position with similar compensation and benefits as quickly as possible to minimize the financial impact to their families, not to mention that this was occurring during the peak of the coronavirus pandemic. While the Union Bargaining Committee was working at the table to negotiate the effects of the pending plant idle, we were also fielding calls not only from members, but also members' families who had concerns over the negotiations and what they could expect in the weeks and months to come. When Marathon went into the indefinite idling in October of 2020, they began operation as a shipping terminal. They did keep on a small number of employees to staff the terminal. They allowed folks with more seniority who worked in the areas that were still active the choice of staying or leaving when the refinery transitioned. If they stayed, they would be keeping their job, but would deny a less senior person with a potentially much longer career ahead of them the position. It meant people who had worked a full career at Marathon and who were on the verge of retirement faced a difficult decision, one that impacted their own lives as well as their coworkers. Losing so many jobs at a place like Marathon all at once meant that many folks looking for work expanded their search beyond the Bay Area, even to other states. These are people that used to be active in our Contra Costa and Solano communities and beyond, who used to be taxpayers and consumers and community volunteers. There are other local companies who were also impacted by Marathon's closure. A local credit union closed the nearest branch to the refinery that many of our members and folks associated with the refinery used. Local restaurants who relied on our flow of before shift and lunchtime and after shift traffic suffered. That's not even mentioning the loss of tax revenue, or donation dollars and hours put back into organizations locally like the Boys and Girls Club, local STEM education, and the PTEC program at Los Medanos, blood drives, coastal cleanup efforts. The local impact of losing a large employer like Marathon can't be overlooked. I saw firsthand the rippling effects it had from individuals to families to communities and local economies. And as the market for fossil fuels changes in response to the need to transition to green energy, all of those effects should be considered and planned for by groups investing in minimizing the negative impacts to all parties, not least of which the workers. I thank you for your time.
Samantha, thank you so much for sharing your story, for really telling people what it's like to one day have probably one of the safest jobs. I think we were talking about this before. You know, I'll take a moment. You know, it reminds me when I lived in Florida. I used to work in Florida, for those who don't know. And I remember when they began to privatize the space industry and what happened to workers thought they had some of the safest jobs in the world. They were putting our, you know, NASA launching rockets, and then they outsourced it, and it devastated a local community. And we're seeing this right now in Martinez. And I just want to thank you for sharing your story. And this really does highlight why we're doing this meeting, right? This is why labor needs to make sure that we are at the table to make sure that when workers face these an industry closing or a place like this closing, that there's actual a way for them to continue to have economic prosperity, right? And I know far too many of your sisters and brothers are still struggling right now just to make ends meet. And I just want to, again, thank you for coming here tonight, for sharing your story. I know we've got, I know they probably didn't say that we had time for question and answer, but I'm going to just do an audible here. You're both here. Amee, if you're still around, why don't we just test this out so we can try it. If anyone do we have any questions or anybody has a question, you can raise your hand now. I'll take like a question. If anybody has one. We're testing this out. Let's see if this works. Here we go. Nadine, you have your hand raised. I'm gonna call on you and you get the one question once I find you. Can someone help me find Nadine on the hand raised? I don't see her. I see that oh, that's a good question. Jack asked if you got a job.
I did, yeah. I did apply to one of the local refineries that was going through another hiring class. Again, I was up against a lot of former coworkers and people I hold in very high regard. Didn't end up getting into that one and don't regret that at all. I pivoted and moved to an entirely different field. I'm working for a nonprofit now, which certainly does not have the same earning potential, but is very fulfilling and gratifying work. So I'm lucky in that regard, even though my life has been very different in the last year. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have Nadine wanting to, oh, hey, Glenn, are you, okay, bye, Glenn. Oh, there you go, Nadine. If you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Okay, I was just wondering if we are working on any legislation that would require industries, because industries are changing now, that transition either the jobs or close to work with other industries in the community to lessen the impact. Are we doing that?
Well, as a labor council, I think part of what we're going to be hearing about tonight is how we get there with smart policies and how we can do this in the future. I think what we all witnessed was last year, and I don't want to speak for Samantha or for Steel or for any of the unions impacted, but COVID kind of accelerated the closure of this plant. There were other factors that were coming, but it definitely, as you all know, gas production or gas really consumption was at a very long, at a low during COVID, which led to this sort of continual closing. Sorry, Samantha, you probably have a better answer than I, so just shut up.
No, I agree. I do think that COVID was the catalyst that made it happen a lot faster than anybody was expecting, even locally. It's certainly not going to be the end of it, though. And as the market changes, you know, the Bay Area stands to be very impacted by the number of refineries in the area and the number of things that they may need to do to stay current with green energy changes and things that they may need to take on as cost for the refinery to be able to reduce its carbon footprint and such. And so I think that this is very real, and this is very current and future looking for our particular area.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'd like to add to that, Nadine, is that that's one of the things that we're going to be really working on and looking at in individual climate caucuses at both of the labor councils here. And so there'll be more tonight on that, and definitely on things to come on that, but that's something we're looking at. And we'll go more into those caucuses later on this evening.
A little foreshadowing for later.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that. Look, I want to thank you. I see we have one, you know what, Victoria, I'm being extra kind. People are going to hate me. If you have a very quick question for the panel, very, very quick question, I'm going to let you do it. You're unmuted, Victoria. Okay, well, sorry, Victoria, I'm going to put you back on mute. And I know it's going to hear you. Amy, Samantha, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Josh.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah, were we able to get the Q&A from the chat from Doug Jones? This is addressed to Amy Scott-Slovick, and it says, please briefly explain what COPD is and why climate change is dangerous for people with chronic COPD.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm doing nurse talk. So COPD is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and it's when people have, they develop disease in their lung that makes it hard for the oxygen and the carbon dioxide to change the way that it needs to. And it can make people get very short of breath, and it's usually progressive. And so when we have air that has more pollution in it, and also actually even higher temperatures, that can cause a lot more difficulty with the breathing, and it can cause more disease to the lungs.
As a hypochondriac hearing anything like that, I'm like, oh my God, is my breath okay? So thank you for that. Any other questions in the chat? I know more people raise their hands. I am tempted, but we're going to keep moving. I apologize, but we kind of went a little longer, asked a few questions I wasn't sure we were going to do. So I'm going to lower your hands for the next thing. If you have another question, maybe we'll get to for the next panel. Samantha, Amy, thank you so much for being a part of this tonight and being a part of the climate convergence. Thank you for sharing your stories and for representing your unions in this unique moment in time that the Bay Area has experienced. And I just want to thank you again for your time and for your stories.
Thank you.
And
thanks for the opportunity.
I completely agree with Catherine. Fantastic job for both of you. I'm going to applaud. I'm sure other people are applauding at home on their screens or their computers and just telling them that they're muted. So thank you both. So, okay, we are moving on to our next panel, or not our next panel, our first actual presentation, which I'm very excited about. This will cover research regarding how to put Californians on a sustainable path for a high road equitable economy. Our presenter is Dr. Carol Zabin. Not you, Brian Obach. You're coming later, Professor Obach. We got you in a bit. I'm going to take you off of camera, though. It's good to see you. This is for Carol's time. Let's do that. Haha. Dr. Zabin is the director of Green Economy, the Green Economy program at UC Berkeley Labor Center, which is, I'm going to say this, is not, they don't, even though I'm on the advisory for this, they don't pay me to say this, the premier institution on labor issues on the West Coast. Dr. Zabin, we're so excited to have you here to share your presentation. I'm going to shut up and let you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Josh. And it really is just such an honor to be asked to present here. I'm so supportive of this effort, especially the joint effort of the two East Bay councils, because it really does widen the set of voices and the set of issues. And nobody can say it better than the people who experience the different impacts of climate change, as well as our efforts to reduce our climate crisis, like we just heard in the last panel. And, it is a complicated and difficult conversation because different unions are in different situations with regard to climate change. Of course, we're all getting hit hard by the fires and drought, et cetera, but some people have their livelihood at risk. Some people live next to refineries. Some people, our public sector workers and tax revenues might go down as the oil industry declines. And other unions have really a lot of opportunity to build power and gain membership and improve jobs. So all of that's happening at the same time. And what I'm going to try to do is show some common ground and a way forward, which I believe there is. There's a way forward of addressing our climate crisis, meeting our state's climate goals, and supporting workers in the process. The key takeaways is that, climate policy, it's addressing our climate crisis is a government effort. It's a deep and broad government intervention in the economy. That's the only way it's going to happen. And labor has influence over climate policy because it has influence in politics and policy. And I want to emphasize that right now, we have really a once in a generation opportunity with both the Biden and Newsom administrations really supporting and being explicit about both meeting our climate goals and supporting workers in the process. So they're supportive of the big picture, but what I'm going to be talking about a little bit is the devil is in the detail, because there is so many decisions that are made that affect what kinds of jobs are created and what happens to workers. And so the bottom line is, with intention, we can do it. And what I mean by doing it is ensuring good union jobs in the industries that stick around and become less emitting, as well as supporting pathways into those good union jobs for folks who've been excluded, as well as supporting workers in the declining industries. And it's important to realize how comprehensive climate policy is. It's not one policy. When we were doing the Jobs and Climate Action Plan for the state, which has a lot of detail for folks who are interested in labor strategies related to our climate policy, we reviewed, there's over 100 really important climate policies, because really, the California, which is still the leader in the nation, has developed this comprehensive portfolio that tackles all or most of the industries that are big emitters. And they really use all the tools of government policymaking, from mandates like the Renewable Portfolio Standard or a clean truck rule, to public investment, which is really important, but it's not at all the only important policy, to incentives, for example, rebates on electric vehicles or buying down the cost of energy efficiency retrofits that residents and businesses do, to our market program, our cap and trade program. And when you look at the key industries that are affected by these government policies, well, what do? They map onto our labor market. And we have a low-wage jobs problem in California and in the nation, as you all are really aware of, with 1/3 of California workers working in low-wage jobs. So when climate policy affects those industries, you can't expect it to result in good jobs. It's gonna, the jobs affected by climate policy, some will be good and some will be low-wage jobs. And when we actually look at the jobs affected by climate policy, and you can zoom into this since we're on Zoom. If I was in person, I don't think you could see these little letters, but that's one advantage of Zoom. And a notable characteristic is that the vast majority are blue-collar occupations. And there's 2 points to be made here. One is, it doesn't make sense to talk about green jobs. It makes sense to talk about greening industries and greening jobs, because an electrician who is installing a solar array on a solar farm is still an electrician, or a bus mechanic who's working on an electric bus is still a mechanic and has to also know how to, change the windshield wipers, for example. So really we need to talk about greening jobs, not this separate new group of green jobs. And secondly, blue collar occupations. Are they good jobs? Well, they're good jobs when they're union jobs, but there are a lot of blue collar occupations that aren't union. And so we have a low wage work problem in those industries. And so when we look at the impact of climate policy on jobs in California, we see some what we call high road success, like the renewable portfolio standard, which has really driven the most dramatic decrease in our greenhouse gas emissions by forcing utilities to buy renewable sources of electricity. And it's also been good, in terms of its labor values. The big solar farms and geothermal, et cetera, has been built union. It's been built under project labor agreements due to very deep engagement, both in policy and in organizing by the building trades. But there are low road pieces of all the industries as well, including solar, where rooftop solar really has not gone the high road and is in general a pretty low paid job with few benefits. So the point is, we have to be really intentional about creating good jobs and improving bad jobs. We can't just leave the outcomes to the market, because we'll just perpetuate the growth of low wage jobs. And here are some of the low wage trouble spots that climate policy is either putting money into or doing other types of government intervention. And where we can, if we're intentional, incorporate labor standards into these climate actions. And so I listed a bunch of the problematic areas where, with intention and with the incorporation of labor's tried and true strategies, those jobs can be improved. We know the tools. We know in construction, it's project labor agreements and a variety of other tools. In other industries, we know we can use procurement requirements and wage and benefit standards. It's important to think about where the leverage is, though. For example, offshore wind, where we have the ability to incorporate labor standards, is actually the federal auctions of the sites for offshore wind development, and that's where we can put in the requirements or the encouragement of project labor agreements. And so that's one decision you might not pay attention to unless you were deeply involved in that industry. In contrast, for battery energy storage, which is the other big new renewable, that's about, labor just had a fight in the contractor state licensing board. Were the solar contractors able to install that, or do you have to be an electrical contractor? And the vote was 11-3 in favor of the electrical contractor. So that's that industry is probably going to go more high road. So again, it's really about engagement and understanding of the industry, and as Josh said, staying on top of the changes and the evolution of that industry, and getting engaged. But it's all over the place. That's my point, is that you have to engage in many arenas, and a lot of the unions have. Some have been slower. Blue-Green Alliance has been critical in California to really engage in the legislative advocacy at the state level, and there are others as well. The harder question, of course, is the fossil fuel situation. And as folks said, it wasn't climate policy that closed Marathon, but if we are really able to meet our climate goals, the fossil fuel industry in California, which is important, will have to decline and shrink. And one of the places I see a lot of folks talking past each other is on the issue of, how, obviously on the issue of how fast and how to make that transition. And what I see is sometimes a lack of understanding or realism about how if you shut production and shut supply off before you've actually decreased our demand and our consumption of fossil fuel products, leakage is real. That leakage is the technical term that says, you put on mandates and without reducing your consumption of gas, what happens is refineries move to somewhere else and you lose the jobs, but you also are moving, kind of just moving the problem somewhere else, and then importing back the gas. And so there is much more common ground with unions who are affected by possible plant closures or possible job loss when focusing on all the policies that reduce our demand for fossil fuels. And that's from finding alternative renewable energy to building electric vehicle charging station infrastructure, to all the investments that we need to do to rebuild our energy and transportation infrastructure, because investments mean jobs. Doesn't mean you can't then push for greater pollution controls at a local level. And it doesn't get rid of all of the very difficult, which we may see soon in Contra Costa, the difficult issues of at some point plants close when mandates push them, and that can be a benefit to a fence line community who won't live with the pollution, but it does move the problem to other areas. What all labor can get behind, I think, with no questions and no questions about different interests or different positions, is real transition assistance. And there is, again, and once in a lifetime, once in a generation opportunity with money from the federal government and money from the states to support transition, real transition that goes way beyond retraining, that really is a negotiated package to keep workers whole, that involves community economic development and diversification, all the things that we've been talking about labor being at the table. I just want to go back to one slide where we can see the decrease in electric power, emissions from electric power, where we're looking at the green arrow, and we can see a big difference between the blue bar and the orange bar in terms of what we've achieved so far. In transportation, well, with COVID, we actually did have some decreases, but we really haven't tackled successfully decreasing emissions from transportation. And so this is the moment when we are going to be confronted with more refinery closures, and we are going to be confronted with a real need to increase investments to lower demand for fossil fuels in the transportation industry. So I think I'm going to stop there and take questions if there's time. But again, the bottom line is we can do this. Policies have to be crafted carefully. We have to pay attention, a lot of attention in a lot of different policies and programs, because those decisions just come down the pike, and we have to get ahead of the curve to be able to incorporate labor values into climate policy. Thank you.
So we have, I know everyone was texting me during your, from the inside of our inside group. There was a really good question, I think by Peter, had a question for you. So hopefully you read the last Sunday New York Times suggesting a solar panel industry is in danger of becoming gig work. Did you have any thoughts on that? Comment on that article about solar?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I'm really pleased that it's finally getting exposed, because nationally, that's absolutely true. And there was just so often this myth that solar jobs were good jobs. In California, the utility scale solar jobs are very good jobs. Like I said, they're built under project labor agreements. They have apprenticeship investments. They have gone union, and that is because the state building trades got engaged from the beginning and was a major backer of the renewable portfolio standard, and got engaged and convinced the industry that it needed to go union if it was going to grow in California. But that has not translated nationally, and so all eyes on the kinds of conditions the Biden administration will put on the various policies, including investments, but also standards and mandates and incentives on renewable energy, on the renewable energy transition, because unless we get prevailing wage, project labor agreements, skilled and trained workforce, and the set of tools that the building trades have developed to make those jobs good union jobs.
I was on mute. Absolutely. And Dr. Zabin, I want to thank you for joining us. I'm sorry we don't have more time for more questions, but if you live in the East Bay area, you can always email. Here's her email. Reach out to the professor, and she'll be happy to answer any of your questions. So we're going to keep moving because we got a long night and we got a lot of fun stuff to still learn and to grow from. So if we could take this off here, let's stop sharing that. Okay, I have one thing I wanted to say. In the chat, I noticed there's a lively amount of discussion. Please remember that we are all sisters, brothers, and siblings in this movement. Please keep it respectful. If we see that it's not, you might not be here for too long afterwards. So I'm just letting you know that now, that if you're talking in the chat, please make sure that it's respectful to one another. We're all in this movement together. Our real enemy, a lot of times, is capital, not each other. Let's remember that. So moving on. So we're actually gonna have a whole panel here. It's I'm very excited about this. This will be speaking on a variety of representatives and different researchers who have done a lot of complex but necessary work about building coalitions between the labor movement and the environment. And cool, let's get the whole Brady Bunch screen on for a second, and I'll do the introductions. Gretchen, what's up? If you're on, you can join too. Oh, now JB left. Now Gretchen's on. Great. Look at this full Brady Bunch screen, and I'm gonna do some introductions of just who they are on the screen, and then you can all hide again, and then you can come back on, so that way you don't have to like awkwardly look while someone else is talking for like 15 minutes. I might enjoy that, but I'm sure you wouldn't. So Professor Obach is the professor of sociology at SUNY, so State of University of New York, at New Paltz. So Brian, Professor Obach, you want to wave hello to everybody on the Zoom world? We also have Michael Leon Guerrero, who's the executive director of the Labor Network for Sustainability. I saw you wave your hand, so I didn't have to ask you to do that. We have a dear friend of mine, Gretchen Newsom from IBEW 569, who is the political director of one of the powerful, strong union in San Diego, thinking about environmental justice and worker. Okay, and last but not least, we have JB Tengco, who is the West Coast director for the Blue Green Alliance. So we're going to hear from a range of different real-life examples of how we actually build coalitions to make this happen. So with that, we're going to start off with Professor Obach, who I got this personal moment here, is joining us all the way from Turkey. So I think it's at what time? 3 o'clock in the morning right now?
It's 3:54.
3:54. Zoom is awesome, right? We can bring the world together. This is awesome. So Professor, the floor is yours. Everyone else, thank you for being on this Brady Bunch screen for a minute. I will call on you when it's your time to take the full stage. So with that, Professor Obach, the floor is yours to talk about what your research and so forth.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Josh, and thank the organizers for inviting me. This is a fundamentally important gathering. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the fate of humankind depends on this and similar efforts. I was invited to speak here today because I dedicated a good part of my life to studying how these two vital movements can be brought together, the long historic struggle to improve the lives of working people, and the relatively more recent, but no less important movement to protect the ecosystems on which all life depends. I'm a unionist myself. I'm the executive board of my local, and I've been involved in labor basically my entire life. But I'm also an environmentalist, and I recognize that all that we have achieved, the lives that we built, the society we've created will be lost if we undermine the very foundation of human civilization, the ecosystem upon which we depend. The book that I wrote on the basis of my research is titled simply Labor and the Environmental Movement, but it has a subtitle, Labor and the Environmental Movement, The Quest for Common Ground. And it is a quest, it's a struggle. And it's not because we as unionists and environmentalists have different interests. As people, we ultimately have exactly the same interests, to have a healthy, stable, secure, fulfilling lives. The struggle emerges because we are organized around different aspects of our interests. I could be an oil worker who belongs to a union that's fighting to keep a refinery in operation, and at the same time belong to an environmental group fighting to end our dependence on oil, because I know that my children won't be able to survive if we keep burning fossil fuels and heating the planet. How could this be that a dedicated member of two organizations is on the opposite side of the same issue? And the reason is because each of these organizations are designed to narrowly pursue one aspect of my interests without considering the other things that are important to me. And leaders of those organizations, and I know we have many here, understandably feel that they have to act in a particular manner. Because after all, who wants to be part of a union, an organization devised to protect my interests as a worker, that is not going to fight in every possible way to protect my job and my income and my economic security? And at the same time, who wants to be part of an environmental group organized on the basis of my interests as an inhabitant of an ecosystem in crisis that does not do everything possible to prioritize the ecological crisis? So the leaders of these two types of organizations feel obligated to act on one aspect of their members' interests that the organization is designed around, be it a union or an environmental group. But of course, the irony is that this is self-defeating in the end. It hurts the members of both groups who are ultimately the same people, or at least who have the same broad interests in a secure job and a healthy planet. And what's worse, and I think Josh sort of made reference to this, is that that division can be exploited by our real enemies, those who are only concerned about short-term profit and who are willing to sacrifice workers and the planet to get it. Now, this tension is not inevitable in all cases. There was some great efforts made in the 1970s and 80s to bring workers and environmentalists together. There were actually many efforts like this in many places, but much of it was carried out by Tony Mazzocchi, who was a leader of what had been the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, later merged with the Steelworkers. And he had the key insight that the hazards and toxic materials that were harming his members inside the workplace were the same toxins that were harming the environment and the community outside of the workplace. And as a result of his work and others, a lot of important health and safety legislation came out of that. Now, in this instance, unions and environmentalists found common ground. It was in the immediate interest of both unions and environmentalists to advance workplace health and safety regulation, to restrict the use of toxic materials. We need to seek out that common ground, and it was good to hear Dr. Zabin referring to these kinds of opportunities, and to recognize that we can greatly strengthen our hand if we work together. I've had legislators tell me, it's one thing to have a labor advocate, pay them a visit, and it's another thing when they've got an environmental lobbyist in their office. But when they come in together, it's a different story entirely. It's incredibly powerful. They're used to appeasing us one by one. They don't know what to do when these two incredible forces show up together. So I was pleased to see that finding that common ground is central to the work of this gathering. We need to work from that common ground, but we need to recognize that we won't always have that opportunity. that this clear, immediate common interest is not always present. And that's where the really hard work begins when we attempt to build coalitions of unions, unionists and environmentalists. In some sectors, that work is easier. In service sector unions and public employee unions, they can incorporate environmental concerns with relative ease. Not that simple, as we've heard from some speakers, when it comes to the industrial sector unions and building trades. Sometimes the short-term goals of labor organizations directly conflict with the short-term goals of an environmental group. Closing a toxic, polluting facility means an immediate, significant loss to the workers employed there. It's real, and that can't be denied. Now, the way that these workers suffer is no different from what employers do all the time. As we know, replacing workers with technology or moving operations offshore, bringing in union busters. But when it comes to environmental issues, those employers will, of course, pretend like they're workers' best friend and trying to stop these meddling environmentalists. Fortunately, most workers are smart enough to see through that, but the situation is nonetheless a political minefield, and it takes hard work to find solutions and to create those bonds, to create these coalition organizations. It takes insight, it takes intelligence, it takes gatherings like this, and it takes long-term, comprehensive vision of who we are as human beings, a recognition that we are not just workers and we're not just environmentalists. We don't just need a good job. We don't just need a healthy planet. As human beings, we need both of these things. And at times, finding solutions requires that we sacrifice short-term, narrow organizational self-interest for longer-term collective interest. That may mean recognizing, for example, that not every coal industry job will be saved. Employers have already eliminated almost all of them anyway with technology and as a result of market forces. But our ecological survival requires that we stop burning coal and ultimately almost all fossil fuels. Rather than waste time and effort fighting to save that last coal mining job, those workers and their unions are better off joining with environmental advocates to get the best possible deal for new opportunities. And in order to achieve that kind of support from unions, in some cases, environmentalists will need to put off an immediate short-term policy victory to ensure that workers' interests are protected to the greatest extent possible, to make sure, with the example that was raised before, that if there's going to be a solar subsidy policy, that it is truly contingent on installers being paid, having good union jobs, union paying jobs. Put real effort into fighting for a just transition program that really compensates displaced workers. Take a stand on increasing the minimum wage. And that support from environmentalists has to be sincere. I've been in the labor movement a long time, and what I've noticed is that labor activists are good at smelling bullshit, probably from taking so much from employers. But environmentalists must authentically support workers, not just rhetorically and but with real political action. And some environmental groups are doing this. I saw some on the agenda who we'll be hearing from, who are really taking a stand for workers. But it has to be a long-term, concerted, committed effort in order for organizationally these kinds of groups to come together. And the reason it's such a challenge is because organizationally it has risks. When I was doing this research and interviewing labor leaders, someone referred to what the environmentalists are doing. But there are many environmentalists organized in many different groups, and it's a competitive environment for nonprofit organizations. When one environmental group takes a strong stand for workers, there will always be another out there saying that you're selling out by thinking of anything other than the ecological crisis at hand. And that's important because potential members and funders may be drawn away from environmental groups that take that risk, that take a stand for workers and who might seem not to be prioritizing the most stringent environmental position. Union leaders face the same criticism if they have the courage to work with environmental advocates. Employers will tell their employees that their union leaders are selling them out and working with the big bad environmentalists and ruining, eliminating jobs. In fact, and my research showed that it was employers who were funding many of the supposed worker organizations that were fighting against environmental regulation in the 1990s. So both labor and environmental groups have to have the insight and the courage to see that we are whole people, that we need both good, well-paying, secure jobs and a safe community and a healthy environment for ourselves and our children. And this is where I suspect that many of you who come to a meeting like this come into the picture. In my research, I found that behind every successful labor environmental alliance, every time a successful coalition was formed, there were what I called bridge builders or coalition brokers, individuals who played a key role in bringing these groups together, who were able to bridge that divide. Sometimes this was a union activist who had an environmental background, or an environmental leader who came from a union family, or just someone who recognized that this is an absurd situation, that we can't be fighting amongst ourselves when there is so much that unites us, that has to unite us. And I believe I've met several such people, these vital coalition brokers in the course of learning about this conference, the people that brought us all here together. Hopefully this meeting will spur even more bridge builders. And I want to thank you for having me here, and thank you for recognizing the fundamentally important project that you're undertaking. And I look forward, if we have the time, to discuss more about how we can make this happen.
Great. So I'm glad you got a whole lot of hands. So here's the thing: we're going to take question and answering at the end. I'm going to put them all on the Brady Beyond screen at the same time. Then we can field questions. So it won't be the last time you see Professor. Professor Obach, I got to say, I was listening to you, and the whole time I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much. We'll be hearing from you in a second. So if you have questions for the professor, great. We're going to get to them in just a bit. So next up, I'm going to bring on Michael Leon Guerrero from the Labor Sustainability Network for Sustainability, which we're really excited to have you here. Why not, if you can, tell us all about Labor Network for Sustainability, and then also some of the work that you all do across the country.
Great. Thank you, Josh. And also, thank you to both the Alameda and Contra Costa Central Labor Councils for inviting us to participate tonight. LNS was actually a co-sponsor of the last Alameda Labor Council Convergence, and it's so great to see that this process has grown and become a regional event. And it's also another sign that there's a growing labor climate movement in this country. So the Labor Network for Sustainability was founded in 2006 by labor leaders. We're a national network of unions, worker organizations, and climate justice allies, and we're working to build a powerful labor climate movement to secure an ecologically sustainable and economically just future. We have a small team of staff in 7 states, including California, New Mexico, Mississippi, Wisconsin, Maryland, North Carolina, and Connecticut. I'm actually zooming in today from New Mexico, so not quite as far as Turkey, but about an hour ahead of you all. So, and LNS, what we do is actually, speaking of bridge building, but Professor Obach, is that we see our job as working to build those bridges between movements, and at the same time pushing us all to move further and faster to address the climate crisis. Organizing local, regional, and national convergences like this have actually been a core part of our work, and they've been great spaces to share lessons and strategies for building labor climate collaborations. And in that light, we hope to see many of you next year at our 4th National Labor Convergence on Climate, and we'll send the details of dates and location in the near future. So in terms of our current work, I'll start with a report that we released earlier this year called Workers and Communities in Transition, which I think is real relevant to what folks have already talked about. It was based on a year-long Just Transition listening project. And this was a joint partnership with environmental justice allies and scholars from 4 universities, including Dr. Vivian Price from CSU Dominguez Hills, who's who's also with us today. And you can find the report and our findings and recommendations on our website, and I'll post the link in the chat box. So we know there's a lot of skepticism in much of the labor movement and in communities throughout the country about the idea of just transition. The transition we need is going to be on a scale that we've rarely ever had to take on. So we figured the best way to make sure that economic transitions are just is by learning firsthand from the people that have lived through them, hearing the stories as we did from Sam Scott earlier today. We conducted over 100 interviews in 26 states with folks from a range of industries, including oil refining, auto manufacturing, textiles, healthcare, agriculture, and others. And the interviewees have experienced major job loss in their communities due to factory closures, downsizing, automation, the pandemic, and other reasons. These were in-depth interviews lasting up to 2 hours. And the stories we heard were both devastating and inspiring. Not surprisingly, the picture that these interviews told about our history of economic transitions was not good, just as we heard from Sam earlier today. Many interviewees described devastation in the wake of the plant closings, support systems that were wholly inadequate. They spoke of receiving job training for jobs that didn't even exist in their communities. They lost healthcare benefits, and unemployment benefits that were inadequate to begin with expired before they could get new jobs. And many were forced to relocate or lost family members or friends to suicide, alcoholism, or drug addiction. And also a common refrain was that people felt the loss of community and identity. The North American Free Trade Agreement was named as a root cause in many communities, which isn't surprising, since the US Labor Department certified that nearly 1 million jobs were lost due to NAFTA. But we also learned of the ways that workers and communities managed these transitions, how they lived through them, how they found resources and provided mutual support. And I think there's a lot of good lessons that we can learn and ideas on how we can actually make transitions more just. One example that really stood out for me at least was rapid response programs. These are federally funded programs through the Labor Department, used to be in a number of states, and the programs are run by the states. But in the state of Massachusetts, for instance, the state AFL-CIO actually runs a program. So they set up an emergency response team that meets with workers whose plant is being closed and helps them connect to financial resources, social services, and career opportunities. I mean, it's really organizing work, and the folks that do it are come out of the labor movement. And it treats people as human beings rather than stranded assets. And we've seen similar success in places like Pennsylvania and other states. We learned more about Colorado's Just Transition program, which was created by a statewide coalition led by labor and environmental justice organizations. The program now gets bipartisan support in the state legislature to help co-workers and their communities in their transition. And then we also learned some about the Washington State Labor Council, which anchored one of the most diverse labor climate coalitions in the country. And although their ballot initiative 1631 failed, it was able to win important climate and labor policies in the legislature afterwards. So, so there are other examples that are in the report, case studies. I saw a reference to the work up in the redwood forests in the chat box, and that's one of the case studies also in the report. So for economic transitions to be successful, it really does require a holistic effort and strategy, and Dr. Zabin, I know, referred to that earlier. Dr. Meejan Shah of Occidental College, who is also one of the authors of the Just Transition report, talks about 4 pillars. One is strong governmental support. So the economic transitions are happening all the time. Workers in fossil fuel industries are already losing jobs, not because of climate change, but as we heard, due to changes in the economy, the pandemic, and other reasons. And so we have to build the safety nets, as Dr. Zabin said, to make sure that workers and communities have the support they need to transition. That includes healthcare, childcare, pensions, expanded unemployment insurance, even expanding the trade adjustment assistance program to cover other things like a shift to a climate safe economy and rapid response programs. Second is we need dedicated funding streams. So this includes major investments by the federal government. Colorado's Just Transition program, for instance, is going to cost roughly $100 million a year. Without federal support, the state will be challenged to come up with those resources on its own. Third is economic diversification. Job creation, as Dr. Shah talks about, is the best transition strategy. And so again, Dr. Zabin spoke earlier, and Dr. Robert Pollin will speak in a few minutes about critical work in this area that they're doing, offering pathways for job creation and just transition in California. And fourth is strong and diverse coalitions. The most successful efforts we've seen are when labor is central to a process that includes community, environmental groups, and others. So our report highlighted IBEW Local 1245 in California as an example of labor, government, and environmental partners in the transition of shutting down the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant. Also, strong labor standards, which has already been spoken to, are really critical. And many of our environmental allies are increasingly understanding why the PRO Act, for instance, actually is an essential climate justice policy. So we're working with partners in the climate and environmental justice movements to make sure they're including high road labor standards as part of their agendas and policy proposals. So this listening project actually inspired another listening project that we started this year called the Young Worker Listening Project. During the climate strikes in 2019, led by youth climate organizations, we found that many young workers are actually involved in these efforts, and they talk to their peers about climate change, environmental justice, and just transition. Yet they're a voice that's often missing in mainstream conversations about climate change. So we're partnering with young worker programs, including the LA Young Workers and IBEW Local 11 Renew and youth-led climate groups to conduct a survey and interviews to learn more about the perspectives of young workers on climate change, how labor can be engaged in the issue, and build labor climate partnerships. So we feel these voices, they're critical to build the bridges across the labor, climate, and racial justice movements, because they actually really are understanding these intersections often more than some of us in the previous generations. So I'll also attach a link to the survey in the chat box and invite people to share that with workers and your unions and others that are 35 and under. And the last area I'll speak to real quickly is transit equity. So we've worked with Bay Area affiliates on Transit Equity Day every February 4th to commemorate Rosa Parks on her birthday, because her refusing to give up her seat on the bus that sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, it wasn't just a catalyst for the civil rights movement, but also an important demand for transit equity. So each year, local coalitions made up of unions, transit right organizations, civil rights groups, and others, they do actions on February 4th to demand more affordable and accessible transit. Local governments are also honoring Transit Equity Day now, and Secretary Pete Buttigieg, Transportation Secretary, also did this year. So this is a real sweet spot for building labor climate coalitions because it creates good jobs in manufacturing, operations and maintenance. It addresses equity, disability rights, and it's also a critical climate solution. So I'm also going to put a link in the chat to testimonies, hearings that we did earlier this year on transit equity, hearing from workers in the industry and also transit riders and others describing the importance of transit in their lives. And one of the main ones I'm going to put in is from Steve McCauley from Smart 105 in Los Angeles, who left his job in trucking to work at the BYD electric bus manufacturing plant. It's a really moving story. So I hope you get a chance to view that as well. So I'll stop there. I know we got a lot to talk about, and welcome your questions and discussion.
So we're going to get to your questions. Remember, if you have questions for Michael or for Professor Obach or for anyone else we're about to start hear from, save them to the end. We're going to go through a whole Q&A. I want to thank you so much for being on here. Okay, next, we're going to turn this over to Gretchen Newsom, who's the political director of IBEW 569, who I like how everyone here is joining us from other places. So we had Turkey, we had New Mexico, and now we have San Diego. So it is my pleasure. Gretchen, why don't you tell everyone what the good news is in San Diego and what you all were able to accomplish in like the last 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Years.
Last Friday. We haven't rested since then. So I'm going to get into that real quick. So Gretchen Newsom, political director for IBEW Local 569, representing over 3,600 union electricians and power professionals throughout San Diego and Imperial counties. IBEW 569 has been for a long time at the forefront of combating climate change with meaningful investments in renewable energy and good green union jobs. Been doing this for well over a decade now at this local, before my time. Our members have built over 2 gigawatts of renewable energy within our jurisdiction, with an average of 80% local hire across solar projects in Imperial County, which is one of the highest unemployment rates in the whole nation. We were also one of the first building trades unions to hire a full-time environmental organizer direct from Sierra Club, because they know best. And that was Micah Matrosky, who just transitioned to being promoted within IBEW and now serves the 9th District. And her replacement, Christina Marquez, is going to continue a lot of that environmental organizing work. And I think Christina is online tonight and joining us as well. But in the vein of providing you with a real and very tangible success story of labor collaborating in strong partnership with environmental and social justice groups over a long-term convergence between labor and environmental groups, I'm going to direct you to what Josh just spoke about, the very recent win. Last Friday, our regional transportation and planning agency called SANDAG voted to enter into negotiations on a project labor agreement or community benefits agreement with the building trades in connection to our regional transportation plan on more than $160 billion of future construction work. That's a B, billion. Our second highest PLA that we've ever done is 3 billion. So we went from 3 to 160 billion. And this could be, I've heard that this is the second largest PLA in California, right behind LA Metro. I've also heard it might be the second largest PLA in the nation. This major victory did take several years and several gray hairs to come to fruition. And nobody believed 7 years ago that we would be here today. If you had taken a look at the political makeup of San Diego just 7 years ago, is much more conservative in a majority of the area of San Diego County, and we have chipped away at that and flipped it over. So it all started by labor collaborating with environmental advocates to identify common values and form a coalition to completely change the direction of SANDAG and our regional transportation network. I think all of you know on this call, but driving accounts for, I think it's 39% of state and 45% of the unincorporated county greenhouse gas emissions. So transit and transportation, significant factors when it comes to addressing climate change. And so if we're going to address this climate crisis, it requires the deep government intervention in transit and how people move about in counties in the state, as Carol Zabin spoke about previously. And that organizing work, again, started around a previous update to our Regional Transportation Plan, or RTP. Most of you will be familiar with that acronym, wherein we identified that SANDAG was not being effective in moving the needle to reduce greenhouse gases from cars, lowering vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, and investing more in mass transit and alternative mobility. So like-minded unions like AFT, Unite Here, and IBEW, which all of us had long-standing understanding and acknowledged that climate change is real, united with environmental and social justice partners to push back at SANDAG and to try to change the RTP. And it has been a really long, hard road, and it continues to be a long, hard road. But the very first step was to get everybody together, identify common values and a vision. And we all know that we're not going to agree on everything, on every topic, but it is deeply important as you embark on this work to identify your core values and then stick with them in your coalition work. So the Quality of Life Coalition was born. And I want to share with you our vision statement. I'll load afterwards the link to our website. So the vision is to invest our public dollars in a socially and environmentally equitable manner to build a vibrant, inclusive economy that delivers environmental and economic justice, lifts up communities, creates healthier communities, addresses the climate crisis, and ensures natural resource conservation. And here are our mission and goals. We seek to adopt a more sustainable and socially equitable pattern of land use, preserve, expand, and restore natural habitat and open space in the region, ensure adequate location in a variety of parklands, providing equitable access and appropriate recreational uses in the region, protect and enhance regional water quality while advancing a resilient, multi-benefit, low-carbon water supply, reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other pollutants through enforceable measures, create good middle-class jobs, especially in vulnerable neighborhoods, and support the collective bargaining rights of workers. Expand and preserve affordable housing and home ownership, particularly near transit and job centers, and pursue transportation justice, which is the right of every person to a safe, accessible, affordable, effective, and healthy transportation network. So that took a while to get everybody on the same page. But once we were on the same page, we were all moving in the same direction. One of the core areas that we do a lot of work on is to, again, invest in social, economic, and environmental equity. And because this is largely a labor group, I'll share with you this, but there was many other components to this. But we sought to dedicate a majority of funding to communities identified as most disadvantaged. And for this purpose, disadvantaged communities are defined as the 25% of San Diego County's 628 census tracts, or 628 census tracts that rank highest within the region on the most current version of the Cal Enviro screen. And we also seek to provide training and work opportunities for county residents through a project labor agreement with 3 key provisions. 1, participation in state-approved joint labor management apprenticeship programs. 2, local hire with enforceable standards targeting vulnerable communities and populations like veterans. And 3, labor peace. So there's your PLA. And all the coalition partners all agree that this was a priority for them, and we would work collectively in that regard. There's much more that we're working on, but I'll elaborate a little bit more on how we got to the point of winning this major victory and vote for workers. And it takes, in essence, perseverance and persistence and guts. So after Sandag didn't listen to us and our request for serious changes to the RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, Sandag started planning a ballot measure and a tax increase to fund the bad RTP. So a group of us, environmental labor organizations, started meeting to discuss the measure, specifically on how we could influence the contents. We circulated a request for input to a number of organizations. We gathered and gathered and gathered all the responses to inform our position on the measure. And that became the Quality of Life Coalition. And then when we reached out to Sandag in hopes that they would engage with us, the community and workers in planning for a ballot measure, they refused to work with us. They were like, man, you're just a bunch of community organizations and workers. We don't have to listen to you. That was a big mistake. So when we saw the final ballot language, it was clear that we had to oppose it. So we organized a campaign to defeat it. We raised under $100,000, and that was going up against multiple millions of dollars in support of the measure. We ran a lean, mean campaign pointing out the failures of the measure to protect families from pollution and wildfires. And this measure did split labor, as there were some that believed that widening freeways and building more roads and capacity for more cars and more pollution would create more jobs for their members. So that was that short-term benefit. So there were some that were supporting this measure. And then there were others like IBEW 569 that said, hell no, that's not the right way to go. We need to think long-term, and we need to have a better regional transportation plan that does right by all the communities. So this is connected again to what Professor Obach had talked about earlier, short-term concerns versus long-term collective interest, and the measure failed in 2016. So we also recognized, because you can't just stop there, you can't just kill something and then be like, okay, we're done. You got to build up, you got to get what you want by making those investments and building the organization better. And just completely changing it. So we recognized that a change in leadership was needed at Sandag. We chipped away at the reputation of the then executive director, and he ultimately resigned. We then recognized that the power structure of Sandag needed to change. For too long, climate deniers within small cities were calling the shots for the entire region and prevented meaningful investments in mass transit and other values and priorities of the Quality of Life Coalition. So we embarked in drafting and supporting legislation to change the power structure so that the vote structure flipped from a tally vote of 19 cities, including all those little small cities that didn't believe in climate change, to enabling a weighted vote based on population, thus enabling the power to shift from the small cities to the larger cities that has the bulk of the communities and empowering communities to have a stronger voice. But to be successful, we needed the support and the alliance with the powerful legislative champion to get this thing through Sacramento. This is what would ultimately become AB 805. If you Google that, you're going to find a lot of stuff on it. But we needed none other than Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez, who in my mind, and I'm sure that this opinion is shared by many, is the best champion of labor and working families. She is relentless. She changed Sandag. And if you don't know who Lorena Gonzalez is, please Google her right now and follow her work, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. She is the bomb. I love her. So then we also helped get a new leader at Sandag, somebody with real vision for impactful change. That's Hassan Akrada. He has been laying the groundwork to build a more robust transit system with the 5 big moves. It's another key term to look up if you're interested. Then some of us took on the effort to change the representation of certain elected officials at Sandag, because AB 805 changed the power structure, but still you got to be concerned with who has those seats and those votes of power at the agency that you're trying to change. So some of us took on a very strategic, long-term political goal to change certain mayors, oust those that had been opposing working families and opposing climate action, and change it up. And so we did that during election cycles repeatedly. So now Sandag is again updating their RTP. They have new leadership, they have a new board. They're moving in a much more progressive direction. The new draft of the RTP is better than anything that we've seen before, but the coalition is still continuing to push the agency to be even better and to build back better sooner and address our climate and greenhouse goals sooner. I know what that face means. That means I'm only have one more minute. So then Friday we had the PLA vote. It was a relentless amount of energy to get this done, but we did it with our coalition partners and the building trades and labor, deploying massive numbers of stakeholders to call in and testify and support. So in closing, be persistent, stick to your values, and make the tangible changes for progress. You aren't ever gonna do it overnight. You've gotta have like that long-term focus to keep doing it every day for years to go. And the last thing I want to say is God bless Carol Zabin and all of your work. You're so deeply appreciated. And that's it.
Amen to that. Gretchen, wow. And I saw someone say on there, like, is there a case study? This happened last Friday. I mean, like the whole thing is like, give them some time. Let them like catch their breath.
I haven't slept yet.
Yeah, come on, case study it up. But Gretchen, you'll be back in a minute. We'll have some questions with you in a second. Thank you so much. Okay. This is fun, right? This is really fun. Okay, JB, what's up? Welcome. I like how you just came on. You were ready to go. Everyone, this is JB Clark. Why don't we say JB Clark? JB Tengco from the West Coast Director of the Blue Green Alliance. And JB, the floor is yours. Welcome to the Climate Convergence of 2021.
All right, thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen here. You guys see that?
We sure can.
All right. Let me just keep making sure that's everything.
Good to go.
All right. Well, thank you all. So my name is JB Tengco. I work with an organization called the Blue Green Alliance, and BGA brings labor and environmental groups together to look at how can we address climate change in a way that creates good jobs. I myself come out of labor. I used to work for the state Fed years ago, then on to the state Democratic Party here. I have not traveled far. I'm only in San Francisco. But still I'm excited to be here. So BGA started about 10, 15 years ago with this idea of how can we really start to address these issues in a way that bring these groups together. We have labor on the labor side in BGA, we have trades unions, we have manufacturing unions, we have public sector unions. On the enviro side, we have what's generally called the big greens, Sierra Club, NRDC, EDF, Union Concerned Scientists. And collectively, we try to really think through how can we look at ways to really think through climate and do so in a way that creates good jobs. Initially I worked primarily in California. I run our state's program, and we've had a number of successful wins around that. And I was really proud of this slide. I hope you all can see this. So here are just some of the things that we've been able to accomplish. I'm gonna see if this works here too. That's not working. Do you guys see a lighter pen light?
I don't see a hand, but I do see the screen.
Here it is. There it goes.
There it is. I see it.
So, we've talked about different ideas of critical wins. And I think we've been really blessed to be a part of some major wins that have brought labor, enviro, EJ together. We've been able to bring these groups together on how do we start to commission 100% zero emission buses in California, which we'll begin to see. As we've done that, we've really looked at how do we ensure that the buses that we buy, I think Michael had mentioned BYD earlier today, and sheet metal, these ideas that we need to buy buses from companies that are good employers, folks that are union, that have targeted hires. So we've been able to add job standards on bus procurement We've been able to do the same with school purchases. On the clean energy space, we worked in 5 states: Nevada, Washington, Colorado, Oregon. In Oregon, just yesterday, I believe, or maybe it was 2 days ago, we passed a law there that they will now be 100% clean. In all these states, Colorado, Washington, California, Oregon, they all have job standards invested in it. So many of the jobs as we go into renewable energy will be done in ways that create good union jobs and also with targeted hires. We're looking to do the same in offshore wind as we start to build out those policies. And we're seeing collective support for that both on the West Coast and the East Coast. As we look at manufacturing, we really looked at how do we bring again these same coalitions together to think through how do we buy products from manufacturers that have invested in developing their products cleanly. A couple of years ago, the Sierra Club, Steelworkers, Blue Green, and a whole host of labor enviro EJ groups came together to pass the first in the nation law called Buy Clean. And now the way California buys its steel or its rebar really takes that into effect. We've since added to that in Washington State the concept called Buy Fair, led by the Washington State Labor Council and our work on the ground there with our staff there, with this idea of not only should we buy cleanly, but we should buy fairly. So how do we also buy from those same companies that manufacture a clean product, but also do so with manufacturers that are responsible, that are good to their workers? We all know that there are good manufacturers and good employers, and we know that they're bad employers. And how do we ensure that if we're going to use state dollars, we do so in a way that rewards or incentivizes good manufacturing? In the building space, we've been able to do a ton with the same sets of coalitions. Just last year, we passed a bill with the NRDC, IBEW, the plumbers, sheet metal, EJ, on how do we clean our schools. So there are new investments in HVAC and water filters, also brought by that same coalition. That same coalition a few years ago looked at, when we look at energy efficiency investments, how can we do that with a skilled and trained standard to ensure that when we spend money to put in an HVAC system or advanced lighting, that we do so in a way that actually meets the savings we wanted to see. Work by Carol or Professor Zabin really highlighted that the single most important factor in showing that if you're going to put an HVAC system, that it actually reduces the energy that it says, is done by ensuring that the people who are doing it know what they're doing, which makes sense. We've worked with SEIU on developing a green janitor certification programs in California, Washington, Oregon. We're really looking at how do we build all of our buildings cleanly. Michael earlier today talked about this work in Colorado. We were really excited about that. So we literally wrote the bill, the language, and now the law that enacted the Office of Just Transition in Colorado, as Colorado is really dealing with how do you deal with the loss of coal industries there. It's a big issue, as Michael was saying, and we're continuing to think about it. We're just at the beginning stages. And what we know, sadly, more than anything else, is there have been more failures than there have been any wins in this space. And so how you do this really matters. We're tackling these same issues at the federal level with Biden and the American Jobs Plan, again, with these same sets of coalitions. And looked at the same at how do we work in refineries, the refineries that Tracy and Sam had mentioned earlier today around, and the stuff that Tracy had said about really ensuring that the people working in the refineries have the ability to ensure that it's safe, not just for the workers, but for the communities. As we know, and as the folks there know, that when mistakes happen, and a lot of Richmond, unfortunately, was negatively impacted by some of those mistakes, that could be very dangerous. And so we've been able to bring those same coalitions to work on that. In the car space, both on trucking and electric vehicles, really looking at how do we add workforce standards as we build out this new infrastructure. And one of the things I'm really excited about here was in bringing enviros to support misclassification, the AB5 bill that California led a few years ago, and then similarly sadly in the losing effort for Prop 22. But we really got the enviros to understand that, we can put as many policies and goals that we want about cleaner cars on the roads, cleaner trucks on the road, But unless we fundamentally address the business models of companies that misclassify, we're not going to hit those goals. And so we've been really able to get Enviros to understand this collective effort of it is both how we look at how we go green, but how do we do so in a way that creates good jobs, and how do we do so with companies that are good employers. And then lastly, we've been able to do a lot of this around water and natural gas. A few years ago, that same coalition led, again, some of the strictest language in the nation on finding and fixing leaks in California. So we've been able to see, as you look at this slide, that across the states and hopefully by the end of this year under the Biden administration, that we've been able to bring labor and environmental community groups together to ensure that we're both addressing climate, but doing so in a way that creates good jobs. The way we look at it, and this is really something, oh, whoops, I'm sorry. So I think one of the things that Carol had mentioned about fighting climate change is it's a lot of policies. I think we get really excited about thinking about the American Jobs Plan or the Green New Deal, but when you really break that down, it's a series of individual policies in wind, public sector investments, manufacturing, cleaner buildings, and the totality of that, you bring them all together, that's what ends up addressing climate change. And I raise this because I think one of the things that we see as we look at this and as unions and union members talk to us about how do we get involved, there are policies that there are ways within your industries and within your sort of sector of influence that are climate issues that are really sort of fundamental to your unions and to your locals. And it's so trying to think through what those might be that really helps us think through how we can address climate change in a bunch of areas. How we look at addressing climate change is something that I learned from Carol, is really these two concepts, climate policy and workforce levers. For a long time, when we thought about climate, we thought about, we got to get more solar or more electric vehicles. And what I think we've heard throughout this conversation over and over again is how you do that matters. We know that jobs will be created, but unless we are proactive about ensuring that those jobs are good jobs, we will create jobs. That is true, but we could create very crappy jobs. And so what we've seen in all those policies that I showed previously and what we continue to push for with our partners is how do we have a climate policy, be it cleaner energy, cleaner transportation, cleaner buildings, but then how do you marry that with the workforce levers, the blue side, the union side around job quality and job access? And it's really the combination of the two that kind of gets you there. I'm guessing I'm running out of time here.
Take a minute or so, you're good. You're great. Don't worry.
I'd say one of the 5 key lessons I've learned as I look at how we've accomplished this are really these 5, and particularly something to think through from a labor perspective. Knowing how it makes a good job is really important. So one of the things that we hear often, both from the labor side, from the enviro side, from the EJ side, is we need to go forward with ensuring that we address this level of climate change. But being able to insert what is critical about how you ensure that is a good job. BJA spent a lot of time and continue trying to what that looks like. And again, we clearly do that with our union partners. They're kind of is a priority and relevant to your union. One of the things that we often see is our labor, we'd like to get more involved. And I think what we recognize is, your unions are stretched with so many policies and issues that we're fighting for. And so how do we ensure that whatever issues are coming up are something that's central to your union, which then makes it easier for them to spend the time and the resource and the political capital to make that happen. The third one is addressing cost and ease. I think one of the things we're really starting to see is that we've been able to prove time and time again that you can pay good wages, that you can have target hires, and you can still have labor, you can still have solar adoption, you can have wind adoption, you can have more EVs on the road. And we're continuing to have to make that case. We're not always there yet, but we're continuing to have to make that case. And then the last two are the ones that I've really come to fully appreciate over my time at BGA. The fourth one about listening to each other, I think, is fundamental to the work. What I've seen as I've dealt with frontline communities, EJ groups, labor, be it the trades, to the public sector unions, to the manufacturing unions, is that everyone's fighting for their community, and everyone is fundamentally believes that what they're doing is really important for the community they're fighting for. And one of the things that's critical about that is when you listen to them, you realize where they're coming from is fair. It's not fair to have to lose your job as we make this transition. It's not fair for fence line communities to have to bear the burden of toxic air contaminants. It's not fair for areas like Contra Costa if and when we transition from oil and gas to lose the billions of dollars that provides to the community. None of that is fair. And so what happens is, as you get to number 5, is we get caught up in these positional points, right? We have to win our positions. As I said earlier, came from the Fed. I understand what it means to try to win your position. But one of the things that we've seen, and one of the ways we've been able to bring, when I showed that first slide, all those wins together, is really thinking through what is our goal? What are we trying to achieve? And then working backwards to think through then what are the policies we need to achieve that goal? And my work at BGA over the last 6 years has really shown me that it's these critical lessons that have really led us and helped us achieve some of those goals that we've been able to accomplish.
Thank you, JB. Okay, I am going to, if we can get the Brady Bunch screen up, and it is time to hear from our participants. So if you have questions, first off, I'm going to take a moment. I want to thank everyone who just spoke. I was amazed to hear from all of your stories and the wins you've had and the lessons you've learned. I'm sure other people are going to ask you a lot of questions. So Michael and Professor Obach, if you guys can also join us, that'd be sweet. Okay, let's see. So all you got to do, and people are going to help me with this, either put it in the Q&A or you can raise your hand and I will totally call on you and unmute you. So let me see if you have anyone with their hands raised. Carol, you can join too. What the heck? Come on, let's do it all. Let's see. Okay, Sandy, you have your hand up. Let's start with you. Sandy, if you can unmute yourself. I'm going to ask to unmute. Sandy. Okay, I'm going to keep on moving. Looks like Sandy didn't. Sandy, if you want to try again, I'm totally there for you. Okay, I'm going to, oh, I saw Vince. Vince, can you raise your hand again? I didn't mean to lower your hand. I was trying to keep it orderly. Thank you. All right, so Vince, go ahead, buddy.
Thank you so much. Can folks hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Really appreciate this panel. I'm curious. I mean, I think there's a lot of understanding around how state funds can be tied. Oh, my apologies. I'm Vince Segru. I'm with the Sheet Metal Workers Union. And yeah, really excited to be here looking. We're doing a lot of research into green opportunities. So I think it's great. One major thing I'm curious about, and I'm not sure who wants to take this on, but you know, I understand the whole state funding and being able to tie labor standards to it, but how do we as labor break into the residential solar market? Because I just feel like that is such an industry of growth. And then you have, you know, the Tesla batteries, which are just going to blow up and, you know, not blow up, but they're going to, you know, they're going to expand significantly in California. I'm wondering, how do we help unionize those workers? Thank you.
Can I take that since I represent those electrical workers in
figured you were
the solar industry? So here in San Diego, we have done some of that work. It's an ongoing challenge to organize and unionize solar workers, but two of our significant and large contractors, Sullivan Solar and Baker Electric, are both unionized with their solar workers. But how you go about doing that is kind of some of that pivotal public policy change that we spoke about earlier. And one of the concepts that we're trying to pursue right now is that as renewable energy is hooked into the grid, that any renewable energy, including solar, from individual residences should be paying prevailing wages. So that would completely flip it on its head. I already know that a lot of these contractors are going to say, "Oh, too bad us. We can't afford to pay workers to build solar." Yeah, whatever. You can afford to pay them. I've seen the cars that you drive. So yeah, and Mr. Elon Musk, good luck around the moon.
Yeah, I mean, again, in sort of the research that we've seen on that, right? If you look at the cost of solar, and Carol will know this well too, I'm sure Gretchen knows. You look at the cost of solar installation is only 20% of the total cost of solar. 15% of that goes to profit. 20% of that generally goes to marketing. So let's say that solar, and I think we all know that from a labor perspective, qualified workers, folks who really know what they're doing, save you money. But let's just give that idea that, all right, it might cost you a little bit more. Let's say it costs you 2% more. You're talking 2% of the total installation. 1% of that, you could still be profitable and still take a percent away from marketing, make life-changing impacts for workers, and not have any difference to the solar company, right? So I think from our perspective, as BJ looks at it, as BJ sort of being a policy wonky shop, really looks at, to Gretchen's point and to what Carol had said, is how do we use policy to say, all right, we are incentivizing this. We are using public dollar investments. We can say, if you're going to use public investments, then we need to attach these standards to it. And that helps with the organizing, right? I mean, then of course, labor's got to organize, but I think there are policy things that we can do to help on that.
Okay, we got another question. Victoria, allow him to speak. You are unmuted if you would like to speak. Victoria, or you're there still? Okay, put your hand down. Okay, how about Norman?
I'm here. I'm great. Here. Okay, sorry, I don't know how to finagle this stuff.
I barely do myself. You're great.
I'm a member for 46 years of the NALC, National Association of Letter Carriers. I happen to live in Richmond. I live on the fence line. My house has been tested by the city of Richmond for coal contamination. My house has major coal contamination. So I am basically a worker and an environmentalist. I don't like any kind of talk or words expressed as if we're different, we're separate. We are one. I am one. I am one. And so the thing is, when Carol said that if you belong to a union, you get better wages, I want to say in San Francisco, letter carriers we're a union. We have a union. Guess what? 5 letter carriers are living in their cars, 1 in a tent. That is not okay. So, and the fact that the unions have been, the number of people belonging to unions have been going down, and we're kind of in a weak position. And I think the weakness reflects the fact that they don't value workers. I value, my dad, by the way, was a steel worker, and so were his 2 brothers in Detroit at Great Lakes Steel. So I've got all of this in me. And my question is, how come we're not discussing a 30-hour work week and at 40 hours pay? I don't think, I'm pay attention to what has happened in Detroit. There's a great documentary called Detropia. The auto workers that were lost their jobs due to NAFTA, either they went south or they went to Mexico or some other country. I'm just saying that we need to, we're not separate. Workers, all workers, low wage workers, everybody needs to be part of this. And we need to have a real effort to make sure that anybody that loses their job gets exactly what they were paying for or more. So, and I wanted Samantha, sorry, a question I couldn't get in last time is Samantha. She got a job, but how many of her co-workers are gainfully employed? She said she's got a job she likes, but obviously doesn't pay as much. That has to be considered in this just transition. Thank you.
Perfect. And I'm going to answer this really quickly. And then we'll go to another one. Maybe other people want to answer this too. You see this right here? It's called the PRO Act. If we want to actually change the economic conditions for working people, that means we've got to organize. In order to do that, we have to change the rules of the economy to allow workers to organize. Right now, what Gretchen was talking about, Elon Musk, think about Jeff Bezos went to outer space a week ago. His employees are urinating inside of water bottles. That is a broken system. That's why we're going to pass the PRO Act. So that's our answer for that. This is how we get economic justice and change those dynamics, but we need your help on that. And I agree with you. It's criminal that letter carriers, federal employees, are sleeping in their cars. That's insane to me. And I want to thank you, but we got a few more. I'm going to ask Les, if we can, go directly to the question so we can have some more time for more questions. So Norman, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Real quick, so there's been a convergence before on all this. For those of us that are old enough to remember the stage 2 smog alerts, where businesses had to cut back on their production because the air quality was so bad. And we made moves and we moved through that and we've been better off for it. Jobs were kept. And as was mentioned about Teamsters, there's horses on their emblem, but they don't have much to do with horses anymore. So my question revolves around hope. Where's the hope? And I speak as a refinery worker. I work for Marathon as well. Fortunately, our doors are still open. But as with Sam's case, a multi-generational family, there's tons of those. 3 generations of the same family, aunts, uncles, and then the expectations that the next generation would move into these jobs as well. So there's a lot of good talk, but how do we boost people's hope?
Gotta have hope. Anybody want to talk about hope? Michael, you went off mute first. I saw you move quickly. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, thank you for that, Norman. When I started off my presentation, I talked about how there's a growing labor climate movement in this country. And even when, I started this job 5 years ago, all of the different initiatives and collaborations that we're seeing around the country, the different state initiatives and coalitions that are coming together, the examples like what Gretchen talked about, that to me is where the hope is that people really are starting to come together across movements. And we're seeing powerful movements in this country that are growing as well. And despite what we're seeing in terms of the stalemates at the federal level, there is a growing group of policymakers and elected officials that are starting to understand these intersections as well. So I think there is hope. Time is running out. We do have to move with urgency, but we have to do it thoughtfully. And it does have to be a managed transition. But I think in the way that these conversations like this one are more and more coming together, I think that's a very hopeful sign.
Anyone else have anything on hope? It's a good thing to have hope. Any thoughts? I hope that you did, but okay. Sorry, bad pun. Okay, we got one more question. Martha, the floor is yours.
Hi there. Thank you very much, Martha Hawthorne, SEIU 10-1. It's been a great panel. And I have a question about the definition of clean energy. This is for JB. I have really appreciated the work that Blue Green Alliance has done over the years, but I'm concerned about the position that your organization has on fracking as a clean natural fuel, which I don't think it is. And has it shifted over the years? I don't believe that fixing the methane emissions is going to basically stop them. But what is your position on fracking at this point? I'd appreciate an answer if you have time. Thank you.
It's not an issue that we've dealt with much in the States, particularly in California on the fracking side. So I'd have to see what our position is nationally. I don't think though that I think that we don't actively engage on any issues either on supporting fracking, but I'd have to check.
Okay. That was a pretty quick question. I still have one hand raised, so I'm gonna do this. Sorry for people texting me saying we have to move. I like to have participation. So Sean, last question.
Thanks so much. Sean Brown, I'm at UAW Local 2103, we're Sierra Club employees. I guess this is for the whole panel. I know that the PRO Act and other climate change work is being put into these omnibus resolution bills for the budget resolution. So I'm curious if there's any pieces of it that we should be advocating for as most important to moving the economy forward as quickly as possible, just because it seems like they're having a lot of trouble getting these bills through on their own in their complete form.
Anyone want to talk about the PRO Act real fast about that?
Yay,
Gretchen?
ProAct, go ProAct. And also included in infrastructure, IBEW would really like to see come to fruition the investment in electric vehicle charging stations. We are training all of our apprentices that when they graduate, they are EVITP certified, electric vehicle infrastructure training program. It's an additional certification so that regardless of what company owns the EV and infrastructure, we are well versed and knowledgeable on all of the types of technology on that. So yay, EVs.
Okay, and I said that was going to be the last one, but I lied. I'm going to have the International Vice President of the Boilermakers talk in 1 second as he raises his hand. I'll let Vice President Baca talk in 1 second. But also, what's really important, no, don't keep raising your hands. I said I'm going to get one more person in. With the PRO Act too, is that we have to have change in the rules right now of the Senate. The rules are broken. These are rules brought to you by Jim Crow era that need to radically change if we're going to have any form of changing the voting rights in our system right now. That radically need to be changed to make sure the PRO Act's passed, to make sure anything's passed in our country. We need to have leadership at the top to actually do that. So, okay, Vice President Baca, the floor is yours. We can't hear you though. I can hear you now.
Yeah, I do this all the time, and I still don't unmute myself. Can I ever figure it out? Desanya was trying to call me while we were on this call, and I asked them, are we going to get rid of the filibuster? It's so stupid. We're so stupid. Democrats are so stupid. We let the Republicans, they screw us, and then when we have the control, we let them keep screwing us. But anyhow, from Gretchen, since they don't seem to understand science, it's funny for a Boilermaker to talk about science. But since they don't understand science in the Assembly or the Senate, a Boilermaker will talk about science. We need a lot of charging stations. We need a lot, but they don't understand that you need to power the charging stations. Solar and wind and batteries are not going to charge the power stations for the next coming years. You are going to need fossil fuel for the next several years. So we need carbon capture. And now I'm talking as the Secretary Treasurer for the California State Building Trades. And during the transition, as our new one of our new campaigns, as our energy future, as a bridge to our energy future, carbon capture is the answer to our future for all of our natural gas power plants, cement, which gives off a tremendous amount of CO2. We don't want to shut our refineries down because it will not only displace them somewhere else where they're going to make the gas. And now we're importing gas, and you think we're paying a lot now. It'll go. We have studies from. I don't want to. Sorry, Carol, because my son graduated from Cal, but we have studies from Stanford where we would be paying $10 a gallon for the gas, and not only putting all of the trades workers out and the steel workers and the residual workers, but we need to keep our gas here and phase out. Boilermakers, believe it or not, were formed in 1880, and we are a heavy industrial contract union. Climate change is real, and the Boilermakers have been transitioning we started out with steam locomotives, steamships. We've been transitioning for 141 years. We would hope that people would leave us alone and let us transition into the next energy that's coming. We're not sure what it's going to be. We know wind and solar and batteries are going to be a big part of it. Of course, we can't get to 2045 with just that. There's going to be something else. Hydrogen, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen. My staff is younger than me. They know more about that. It gives me a headache. But carbon capture is going to get us there. Am I talking too much?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow,
you have a question.
The power. Oh, it was a question. I'm sorry. I thought I was a presenter for a second. I apologize. We need carbon capture. We need to wean ourselves off of fossil fuel. We're not going to flip a switch. What is the question? That's how we have to get there. We have to be able to power our charging stations so we can go not just electric, but we're going to have charge stations for hydrogen also, so, and whatever else, and renewable fuels. Sorry.
Okay. Any thoughts on what Secretary Treasurer Obach said on charging stations, carbon capture, the need for these?
All of the above.
All of the above? Okay, I think you got off the hook.
I guess I'd say BJA is heavily looking into green hydrogen.
Cool. Okay, look into green hydrogen. There you go. Okay, so everybody, I know you have more questions, but we have more panelists. We have more Brady Bunch screens to get to where you can hear from others. So I want to thank everyone that was a part of this. I want to thank everybody who participated and listened in. So JB, Gretchen, Brian, and Michael, thank you all so much. We'll talk to you real soon. We're gonna keep going. Now you're still stuck with me, everybody. I'm afraid about, like, that's the truth. But okay, we're gonna clear off the screen. If you could turn off your camera. Good night. I hope you didn't drink too much Turkish coffee to keep you up too late. Okay, we're moving on. So our next panel, we're gonna be hearing from, this is our environmental stakeholder panel. This is our chance to hear from environmental partners that we have at both labor councils that we work on, to see about how, these are ranging from groups that are conservationists to smart growth advocates to environmental justice groups that are part of their own dynamic movements. And none of us can do this alone. So we're excited to really have some of our partners here to share what they're working on. So I'm going to do intros, and if you want to jump on the screen with me to say hi, and then we'll get you all to your individual talks. So first off, we have Igor Tregub from Sierra Club. Igor, if you're here, right on. There you are. There's part one of our Brady Bunch screen. We also have Scott Hochberg from the Sunrise Movement. Scott, if you're there. We have Amee Raval from the Asian Pacific Environmental Network at APEN. Hey. And then we also have Sadie Wilson from the Greenbelt Alliance. Hello, welcome. So I don't know, is Scott here? Scott, you here? You're unable to start your video. That's awkward. Can some of the techs help with that? Good thing is we have a minute. So I'm so glad you're all here. We're going to go one by one, and then we'll bring you all back onto the screen at the same time for some Q&As, kind of what we just did. So why don't we go ahead and start off with the Sierra Club. Why don't you tell everyone the Sierra Club and what you're working on, and then we'll come back to the other screens. And it's good, Scott, there you are. Okay, we all made it on the screen. You see our presenters, you know who they are. They're going to start. The Sierra Club, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, brothers, sisters, and siblings. It's such an honor for me to be here and to listen and to learn and to exchange ideas. I'm Igor Tregub, I use he, him pronouns. I'm joining you from unceded Alani land in Berkeley, and I have been organizing as a volunteer with the Sierra Club Bay Chapter and Northern Alameda County Group and at the state level for the last 11 years. I currently chair the Sierra Club's Northern Alameda County Group and co-chair our SF Bay Chapter's Energy and Climate Committee. And for 3 years, I served as a chapter chair. And I say all this because it has been an amazing privilege to be able to do volunteer organizing. And the reason I have been able to do volunteer organizing is thank labor for the 2-day weekend and thank labor for the 40-hour workday. And, that ability to get an honest day's work, wage and a good wage, and then being able to devote evenings and weekends to give back to family and community. I wanted to tee off of something that really resonated with me that Professor Obach mentioned about the importance of doing this work intersectionally. We have a common adversary, and I would even say the word, I would use the word foe even, not adversary. And it's not anyone here on this Zoom, and it's not anyone in labor, and it's not anyone in the environmental movement. And yes, I know the environmental movement is not monolithic, but it is big corporations, it is the forces of greed, it is the 1% that wants to keep the other 99% down. And in order for us to win collectively, we have to work together. We have to listen to each other. So I really appreciated everything that the previous panelists have mentioned about that, goals versus positions, all of that. My own journey, in fact, was started when I became chair of the Berkeley Commission on Labor. And it was that work on that commission that got me really into housing equity. And it was that work on housing equity that got me into the Sierra Club and doing environmental organizing. And again, that's where I learned about intersectional organizing. For instance, when we all want to support the 3 Ps of housing: production, protection, and preservation. When we do that, we need to make sure that when buildings are built, and hopefully they're being built at rates that are at rents or have rents that are affordable to all, that they're also not, the building itself is not done on the back of the workers. And that's why we were the first Sierra Club chapter to really get behind our support of project labor agreements and local hire provisions. And in fact, there were several projects that we opposed until the developer voluntarily agreed to do that. I'm going to tick off a few other things that we've done. I'm getting my 1 minute. So
you need 1 minute, but you take like a minute and a half.
Okay. I will talk fast because some of this has already been mentioned. We stood in solidarity with our allies in the labor movement around the AB5 fight last year. Our chapter also became the first Sierra Club chapter in the country to have a blanket position that we will support any ballot measure, any ordinance, and any effort in general to raise the minimum wage, first to $15 an hour, and now beyond that. And if you're a candidate coming to us, you better know, even if you're really good on all the environmental issues, but if you're not good on this issue of local hire provisions, minimum wage, we're going to ask you about it at your interview. We also stood in solidarity with labor in support of Measure BB in 2014. This is a Alameda County $8.3 billion transportation expenditure plan. We stood in solidarity with the dredge workers fighting for their ability to get clean air filters at the Port of Oakland. Just last year, we supported a hard-fought project called Aramis, which is now stuck in litigation, unfortunately, but the Alameda County Board of Supervisors unanimously passed it, and we sent several letters of support, and we spoke in support of it. It will produce 100 megawatts of clean, local, reliable power, 188,000 metric tons of carbon offset, and powering 25,000 homes annually. You know what else it's going to do? It's going to provide 400 living wage, all union jobs. And that was one of the many reasons we supported it. We're currently working on Berkeley's own Green New Deal around building electrification. And we want to make sure that that transition to renewables is done in a just way. So some of you, we're in conversations with you right now around that, very exciting. And finally, we're looking forward to joining you when we provide comments on Plan Bay Area 2050. It is my intention to join the Sierra Club in partnership with the Greenbelt Alliance, Save the Bay, Community for Green Foothills, and others that are already supporting the building trades request of MTC and ABEW to have good paying local jobs with local hire provisions, that high road agreement that was mentioned earlier. So thank you so much. Look forward to answering any of your questions and just looking forward to partnering. And the only way forward is together. Thank you.
Completely. And also thank you for, I know for Contra Costa, my I'm the executive director there, but I live in Berkeley. So thanks for what you do on the rent board too. Okay, so next up, I'm going to have Scott. Scott, what's up? From the Sunrise Movement, join us. If you want to jump on the screen here. Brother, we'll see you in a minute. Remember, save all your questions to the end, and we will have that at the end. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop your video. Scott, can you join? Please turn on my video. Oh, no. Okay, hold on one second. Here we go. We are making this happen. Always fun. Ask to start video. There we go. Awesome. Scott, welcome. The floor is yours.
There it is. A little tech problem, but all great. So lovely to be with you all tonight. My name is Scott Hochberg. I'm coming to you from Berkeley. So this convergence is very near and dear to my heart as well, and it's informed my career so far. I started out as a workers' rights attorney, protecting low-wage workers in Silicon Valley. And now I'm a climate change attorney at an environmental organization called the Center for Biological Diversity. I work on transportation policy and just transition issues. And I made that move because it was so clear to me that forming a strong labor climate alliance is what's necessary to move both of these movements forward. So this is really central to how I think about my role in this whole ecosystem of social change that we're engaging in together. But I'm here tonight to talk to you about my involvement as a volunteer in the Sunrise Movement. The Sunrise Movement is a youth movement to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. The group was formed before the 2018 elections to advocate for climate policy and to help bring the Green New Deal into public consciousness. We started to get our first serious media attention when we organized a sit-in in Nancy Pelosi's office to demand action on the Green New Deal after the election. And later in 2019, we brought young people to confront Senator Feinstein in her office to ask for the same thing. We tend to do big actions and capitalize on the tremendous energy of young people that are dedicated to fight for a better future. And in the Bay Area, we have well over 1,000 active members. So there's quite a bit of folks dedicating their time and volunteer energy to pushing this forward. The group has a decentralized structure. It's organized in what we call a hub. There are many hubs across the country. And within our Bay Area hub, there are many subcommittees, one of which is a labor subgroup, of which I'm a member. Being a strong ally to labor is very central to Sunrise, and we see it as integral to how we achieve a Green New Deal and take us closer to a sustainable green economy that also creates family supporting jobs. So let me just quickly talk about two things that the whole hub is working on right now. One of them is a wildfire campaign that's focused on community mutual aid in conjunction with some community partners. Obviously, that's going to be really central to how we support ourselves in the coming months. And we just finished a Good Jobs for All campaign, which ended with a strong demand for President Biden to create a civilian climate corps. Basically, that's a government jobs policy that puts a new generation of Americans, young people, to work in combating the climate crisis. So we hope that that's enacted into law soon. And in terms of what we do in the labor subgroup, we have teach-ins to build the political education of our members. We try to be good allies to unions and building more contact with them, which is why I'm here tonight. And then we educate our members about the just transition and reports like the Pollin report and the state's just transition roadmap. We're strong supporters of the PRO Act, and we did a lot of political advocacy around that. And also, just so you know, one of the main benefits of working with a group of passionate young people is that we're really good at social media and we're really good at turning people out to events. And so just within the last year, we were at the Juneteenth port shutdown with ILWU. We were in San Francisco for the May Day parade that was organized by the Central Labor Councils of the Bay Area. And we supported McDonald's workers and other fast food workers that were fighting for hazard pay and PPE during the pandemic. So this is an invitation to you all that we are proud allies of the labor movement. And if you would like us to turn out at your events to be allies and support and create some catchy social media for you, please do let us know. Thank you.
I had to say, at the May Day rally, it was amazing to see this like sea of yellow coming from you all. And like people were asking us, who's that? and it's a good chance for some dialogue. So if anyone has questions for Scott, Scott's going to be around in just a little bit. We're going to keep moving. I want to thank you so much. Okay, next we have Amee Raval from the APEN, which is the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, one of our dear allies here in Contra Costa County. Talk about what APEN does and the work they're doing and how we partner together. Sister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Josh, and thanks for having me. My name's Amee Raval. I'm Policy and Research Director with the Asian Pacific Environmental Network, or APEN. APEN, for folks who don't know, we're a grassroots space building organization. We organize primarily working class Asian immigrant and refugee communities around a multitude of environmental justice issues, with the aims of really advancing our vision for healthy, thriving communities. We were formed after the first People of Color Environmental Summit in 1991 and have been doing community work for over 25 years. A fundamental part of our work and vision is building community power and really amplifying the voices of our members as the decision makers for the policies and programs that impact them every day. That looks like local organizing and leadership development with Southeast Asian refugee communities in Richmond, as well as Chinese immigrant communities in Oakland, Chinatown. And that's really the foundation of our work, that deep organizing we're doing in our communities in the Bay Area. We're also building political power through statewide coalition building and electoral outreach with Asian American voters in California. And then finally, we do policy advocacy locally and at the state level through legislative work in Sacramento and other agencies. So, we're building power at a variety of scales. One area of work I just want to highlight that I'd love to talk more about if folks have questions is sort of building off of Scott's work around mutual aid. We're seeing the way that California is being pushed to extremes. And we hear scientists often say, we've lost complete control, that there isn't a normal anymore. And that when you add all these cumulative crises together, from climate change, the economic crisis, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic, the impact is cumulative. But for environmental justice communities like those that APEN organizes, there's really nothing new about cumulative health burdens. The climate crisis is pervasive for us, and for many communities, it is felt daily, not just during times of crisis like wildfires and heat waves. And so we're really trying to build community resilience in the context of these multiple crises, as well as historic burdens. And that means a variety of different strategies, but we're really excited about a report that APEN collaborated on with SEIU California and SEIU 2015 called Resilience Before Disaster, really uplifting the need and calling for targeted investments to bolster the social fabric and infrastructure in our communities, ensuring that people and neighborhoods are equipped to respond to the current sort of conditions. And that means investing in our public institutions, places like schools and libraries and health clinics that are really, the showing up for communities. We see communities show up on the front lines for each other every day. We're the ones caring for each other and providing that social support. And so we want to really see that social infrastructure bolstered through public investment. So happy to talk about that more, but I think that that report really offers opportunity for EJ and labor to collaborate and co-create solutions together.
You're the first person to finish without me awkwardly coming on going like, hey, so bravo, right on. This is okay. We'll be right back with you. If you have any questions for APEN, hold them. We got one more speaker, and then we're going to do the whole Brady Bunch screen of Q&A. It's going to be a blast. Okay, Sadie Wilson, Greenbelt Alliance. Hello and welcome. Welcome to the Climate Convergence. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Josh, and
Absolutely.
thank you for having me here today. This is such an impressive group that you've organized, and I'm excited to engage about a topic that doesn't get enough attention in the environmental field. I'm representing Greenbelt Alliance, a Bay Area nonprofit organization that is building on its 60-year legacy as an environmental land use policy organization by addressing today's most pressing issues of climate change, equitable climate resilience, and climate smart development. Our mission is to educate, advocate, and collaborate to ensure the Bay Area's lands and communities are resilient to a changing climate. And we envision a Bay Area of healthy, thriving, resilient communities made up of both lands and people that are safe during climate disasters, can recover quickly from wildfires, floods, droughts, and where everyone is living with nature in new and powerful ways for generations to come. So right now, as we know, the Bay Area has a major problem. We aren't ready for climate change, and Greenbelt Alliance is really trying to rise to that challenge by focusing on data-driven and innovative land use policy solutions and fostering much-needed regional collaboration to plan and invest in equitable, resilient communities. So over these last 60 years, Greenbelt Alliance has stewarded the Bay Area's natural landscapes and promoted the growth needed for thriving communities. But now, planning for the future must take into account the increases in major wildfires, flooding, prolonged drought that are already happening, especially when considering that these impacts disproportionately affect our low-income communities and communities of color. So we actively promote equitable planning and policy through advocacy and research in communities all over the Bay Area. The region's housing availability and affordability crisis also must be solved through new models of development that create sustainable communities with clean air, shorter commutes, healthy jobs, and safer futures under changing climate conditions. In knowing that 33% of the Bay Area's GHG emissions are from transportation, we also advocate for infill housing built in urban areas near transit, jobs, and services, and away from climate risks as a necessary step towards reducing GHG emissions while building the housing we so desperately need. So with those kind of broad topics in mind, we also know that the path forward is complex and more urgent than ever. So that is why we focus on data-driven and innovative policy solutions to help regional coordination and collaboration as we invest in resilient communities. And while we push for bold and revolutionary change in this space, we also push for people-centered processes and policies that can allow for this catalytic moment of climate action to be a positive turning point for both people and planet. Greenbelt Alliance is proud of how we've been able to adapt our focus over our long history. And we pride ourselves on our dedication to serving the people of the Bay Area through nature-based solutions. So I'm excited to represent Greenbelt Alliance here and looking forward to any questions. Thank you.
All of a sudden, everyone's, I don't have to awkwardly come on. Bravo. All right, 2 for 2. Okay, Brady Bunch screen. Let's come on, everybody on. If there are questions, you can either use the Q&A or you can raise your hand and I will call on you. So everyone can join us that just spoke. If I need to turn on your cameras, hold on. I will do that. Can't I do that? Okay, Scott, you're on. You can't start your screen. Okay, hold on. I got you. This is fun. Zoom is fun, isn't it? Okay, we're all on. Here we go. Okay, let's see if we have some questions. I'll first check if anyone has their hands raised. Oh, come on. No one has their hand raised? No one has a question? Like, come on. All right, what do we got in the Q&A here? Okay, I got one from Sean Brown. It's just for Sunrise. I know Sunrise worked really hard in successfully helping to flip Arizona for Senator Sinema. Helping flip Arizona. Senator Sinema has been pretty disappointing, to say the least. I agree with you there. Is Sunrise considering any campaigns to pressure her to stop blocking progress on labor and climate?
First of all, you're exactly right. Sunrise did do a lot of work in Arizona. I was there myself in November.
Actually, it was not fun.
Knocking on doors. Yeah, it was, there were a lot of Sunrise folks there and in Georgia as well. And I agree that Senator Sinema has been quite disappointing, and she's one of our top targets. I will have to get back to you on whether the Sunrise folks down there are doing active campaigns right now, but my guess would be yes. But I will happily find some specifics for you and put them in the chat.
I know that last week during, shameless plug for the PROAC again, that we did like 50 actions last week as a labor movement tied to Senator Sinema about the PROAC and other legislation, her holding up infrastructure that we desperately need. I'm sure Sunrise was there tied directly in there. So what other questions we got? Come on, everybody, raise your hands. There's some questions in the Q&A. Okay, we got another one. Okay, here we go. This is from Norman Rogers. I don't imagine the entirety of the rest of the nation, but we already send fuel to Arizona, Nevada, and occasionally to Mexico or cleaner energy. I don't see a question there. I see a statement. Does anyone have any questions they want to raise their hand and ask any questions? Oh, well, good. We finally got someone raising their hands. Let me unmute them. Here we go. Dorothy. Dorothy, you can speak. Ask to unmute you.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm wondering why California is the almond capital of the world, and how we can use less water on that almond crop and distribute almonds to other parts of maybe the world. Because I eat a lot of almond milk, I eat a lot of almonds, and now I'm switching to oat milk, and so that's my question for everybody.
Oatly's going to rule the world someday. It's scary. Anybody thoughts on almonds? Almond production? And as someone who's allergic to nuts, I have my own thoughts on this, but I don't know if anybody else does.
I can start, and I'd love to hear from others, because water is not my area of expertise, but the Sierra Club does have a water conservation campaign. And in fact, right now, nationally and statewide, a number of volunteers have come together quite recently to do a whole sustainable agribusiness model, because the almond production, you can do a parallel to some of the jobs that were just talked about. Not only is it water intensive as a crop to grow, but and as a food source, but most of the almond business is now concentrated among a very small handful of mega businesses making millions, sometimes billions of dollars every year off the backs of laborers, farm workers that don't make very much at all. So where is the justice and equity in that? And those are the types of campaigns that the Sierra Club is looking at more and more. The time is now to no longer make environmental justice an add-on. It has to be inculcated into every single thing that we do. And that's why the Sierra Club has been increasingly sitting down, being humble in the words of Kendrick Lamar, and listening to the impacted frontline communities and workers in those areas, and asking them, how can we best support you in these trying times?
So thank you. And who would know that almonds were going to come up? If I had a bingo card, I didn't think it was going to come up. I have another question for APEN. So I have this from David. What are lessons that you can share as a base building organization in how to develop leadership on climate issues?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that is the fundamental sort of question and core strategy we're trying to develop, which is power building, community power building. And I think we really advocate for community-driven solutions, not just in terms of the sort of as part of the clean energy, sort of healthy economy we want to build, but in terms of the ways we deploy our strategies. And that means really centering the needs of our frontline communities, working class communities of color, at the sort of at the front of everything we do. And that means deep leadership development. That means really like, again, it's not about top-down solutions, but it's solutions driven by our membership. So I want to give one example to that. As I mentioned, you know, in the context of last summer, where we saw the sort of convergence of the pandemic alongside in the Bay Area, multiple sort of converging climate disasters at the same time, we saw our communities organizing for change and innovating local models. We saw neighbors form mutual aid networks to share resources. We saw schools providing food to families. Libraries were turning into cooling and air respite centers. So these solutions are happening locally despite resource constraints and disinvestment. And so I just want to uplift that all we're pushing for is sort of added resources to bolster that expertise and richness of power that already exists. We always say our communities are resilient. We've had to be in the face of, you know, so many inequities. And so just want to uplift that power building piece. And then on the flip side, at the state level, we have to, in addition to doing the grassroots organizing deeply, we're building a multiracial coalition in partnership with other EJ groups that are organizing frontline communities, with labor, with racial justice and social justice groups, and mainstream environmental organizations as part of the California Green New Deal. And I want to, this is an invitation that all are not just welcome and invited to that table, but we need all of us aligned and united to really move the needle on the issues we want to see and the vision we have for our communities. And the platform is broad-based, it's intersectional, it's multi-sector. And I just want to offer that because that's an opportunity in California to achieve the progressive policies we want to see.
Oh yeah. Okay, I got another question for the whole group, and let's see if we can solve this together. I'm sure we can solve this problem that's plaguing the Bay Area and the rest of the country. So how can ecological design be promoted as a way to bring labor and environmental groups together in solving the Bay Area housing crisis? So who has a solution here on Bay Area housing crisis, or how you all are working to solve this crisis that we are all experiencing here, where workers basically have to live either in the Central Valley and commute and so forth? You all know the struggles. Everyone on here knows this. Any thoughts from the EJ community of what you're all doing around affordable housing, or how we can work together as labor with EJ? Sadie, please.
I can chime in. I mean, I think that from our perspective, the power of infill and you know, allowing housing to be built in places that have access to resources and transit and jobs is so important for meeting our climate goals, but also our labor goals and encouraging housing. We need housing to get built, and we need to work with our labor partners to do that. And so I think getting through some of the NIMBYism is really important, and that has to happen through, you know, collaboration, through top-down and bottom-up work to do that. And I mean, ecological doesn't exactly speak to ecological design, but I think you know, really understanding the power of nature and incorporating those natural aspects, not building in high wildfire risk areas, not building in flood zones. We're not doing that right now. And so that is further exacerbating our housing crisis. So building smart, I think is, you know, really need to see that going forward.
Anyone else want to try to tackle the housing crisis issue of the Bay Area?
Just in 20
awesome.
seconds, I agree with everything that Sadie said. I think that the Sierra Club, we have increasingly partnered with the Greenbelt Alliance on a number of wonderful campaigns, many of which were successful. And the reason they were successful is because stakeholders, including labor, were invited to the table. Because another key part of this, once again, who is building this new construction? And do they have high-well jobs and opportunities to not just have a job, but a career, a fulfilling career that will get them to the next level and be able to raise a family near where they live? Super important. So we need to, because right now what's going on, and we all know this, housing is so unaffordable in the Bay Area cities that folks are driving till they qualify into the exurbs and suburbs, costing us tremendous amounts of not just greenhouse gas emissions, but also it's a quality of life issue. So looking forward to standing in solidarity with all of you to do, to build back better, literally, in the Bay Area.
I also just want to add, as APEN, we have been really intentional, especially in Oakland, about integrating affordable housing advocacy and anti-displacement strategies across all of our environmental justice advocacy. Housing is an incredibly important core tenet of our EJ vision, because that is the #1 issue that our members say they're thinking about, is ensuring they can pay and afford rent and not be moved farther and farther away, especially in a place like Chinatown, where there's such a rich cultural fabric and people are wanting to stay rooted to those businesses and institutions that are so culturally specific. So just as part of building the new for housing, we're advocating for energy efficiency and weatherization upgrades and clean energy upgrades like solar and battery storage. We want to see green housing, but we want to make sure that we're investing also in anti-displacement as part of those strategies, so that as we green buildings and make them more desirable, our members, working class folks, continue to benefit that are living there, and that tenants aren't pushed out or displaced as an unintended consequence. So I just want to offer that example as we're building the new, let's make sure that it's our communities that are the beneficiaries, that we're investing in multifamily affordable housing, but keeping it affordable and not just for the wealthy.
Just to add one last thing, I think Igor and Amee mentioned it perfectly, but just to make a meta point about what they said, basically, I think it's just really hard to be an environmental activist without integrating all of these other issues. And so you see organizations like Sunrise having to take, or wanting to take stances on racial justice, because how could you not see the injustice there and the links between that and the environmental world, and feel a need to integrate that work really closely, and likewise with the labor movement as well. So I think all the answers that were just mentioned are examples of groups wanting to and having to take positions on issues that seem far away from our initial starting point, because that's what it takes to move all these issues forward together.
Right. None of these can be solved by themselves, right? When I think about affordable housing, I want to make sure the workers that are building it can afford those housing, or just in general, right? That we stay in our communities and the communities aren't changing over time. This is, for labor to have partners like you all, where sometimes we might disagree, sometimes a lot of time we're agreeing on a lot, and it's about how do we advance a larger movement? Because at the end of the day, we're all workers, we're all representing working people, and we all need a clean environment. And for labor, as corporate America continues to attack us and our density continues to decline, it's about how do we build up with partners that are also feeling exploitation from this current economic system that we have to rewrite these rules, right? And we can't do this without all of you. We as a labor movement cannot advance a real climate justice for all our members without partners like all of you. So I want to thank you all for joining us. And I know my boss is on this thing, or telling me I got to keep moving. So I want to thank you all for joining us. But real fast, if you could put your info into the chat, because I think a lot of people want to be your friends and be your fans of your organizations. So if you could do that, that'd be awesome. I want to thank you all for joining us. Climate Convergence keeps going on. Zalali, what's up?
What's up? Okay, that's all amazing presentations. Thank you all to the presenters for those wonderful presentations, very informative. Again, thank you to those that joined this evening. We are proud to be united with our partnering organizations in this fight. Our shared objective in dealing with climate change won't carry us far until we build a strong base of union members to be part of this movement. So we'll continue these discussions in our respective climate caucuses and within our local unions. It's important that each union discussion and conversation we had tonight continues as we build our path to real change that uplifts current union workers and creates more union jobs. The Alameda Labor Council's Climate Caucus meets monthly with our next meeting on Monday, August 2nd at 5:30 p.m. So keep an eye out for an email with more information on our climate caucuses and partnering organizations. I want to thank you all again, and I will now pass this over to Amy Scott to give a brief statement. Thank you.
Okay, well, we're going to get to Amy in a minute, but we got a few more presentations we're going to do.
Okay.
And then we'll totally get to Amy to finish talking about the climate caucuses. God, my mind kind of went blank there. Thank you, Zolly, for that. And we'll have you back on to plug this again in just a bit. So our next presentation, next presenter, really, we're going to have one person, no more Brady Bunch screens for you all. We're going solo. Our next presenter is Dr. Robert Pollin, who's the professor of economics and the co-director of the Political Economy and Research Institute, Perry, at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where I actually, humble brag, went to grad school. So this is great. I'm really excited to have someone from UMass Amherst here. He'll be talking about really regarding a major report that he helped commission, that he was a lead author on, concerning California's path to a sustainable future. So with that, Dr. Pollin, if you're there, you can come on screen and the floor is yours for your presentation.
It says I cannot get.
I got you. Don't worry, I got you here. We'll get you on there. Hold on. It's always fun. Where are you? Thank you, everyone, for dealing with me as I get this through. Where are you? Why can't I find you? Can someone please? Is anyone else there that can help me with this? To find his.
I don't see his name. Are you under a different name, Pollin?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I can't seem to find you. Hold on.
Robert Pollin.
Yeah. Okay. Hang with us, everybody. We're going to figure this out. It's going to be a lot of fun. I don't know how you're talking, and I can't see you.
He's showing up under Josh, under your name.
Oh, weird, creepy. Okay, here we go. You are not Josh Anajar, and you don't have to play me on TV, but let me do this, and I'm going to ask you to start your video.
Okay.
All right, there we go. So just ignore the name. He's not Josh Anajar. I'm sorry to give you that name, and we'll fix that in a second, but the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me to this really important gathering, discussion. I'm really happy to be part of it. As Josh, the real Josh just mentioned, so my co-workers and I here at UMass Perry put out a study a month ago that is about, tries to cover a lot of everything with respect to an economic recovery and a green transition for the state of California. And I'm going to go through some of it. I'm going to focus on the part on labor and a just transition for workers. It is, if I may say, data-driven. I heard Sadie Wilson talk about the work she's doing as being data-driven. Maybe this study is way over the top, data-driven. I am going to be presenting numbers. You don't have to follow all the numbers. The point is, I just want you to understand that the main arguments that we're making are actually grounded in some pretty extensive research. So with that, I am going to share the screen. I gotta go to this. Okay, so this is the study, as I mentioned. So a program for economic recovery and clean energy transition in California by myself, and you can see my co-authors all here at UMass. This gives you the overall set of chapters in the study. So you can see we start right where California is in terms of trying to recover from the pandemic, and the centrality of a clean energy transition project as undergirding the short-term recovery. We then talk about clean energy investments and job creation, which is what I'm going to focus on. I'm also going to focus on parallel investments in manufacturing, infrastructure, land restoration, and agriculture that are associated with the so-called Thrive agenda that was really developed by the Green New Deal Network nationally, was introduced as a bill in Congress by Senator Markey and Representative Dingell. So we'll talk about that again from the perspective of job creation primarily. So we will then be able to see the prospects for job creation through investing in a green transition in California. Then we will focus on the impact on transitioning out of fossil fuels in California and pursuing just transition policies for fossil fuel workers. And we will get specific, quantitative about it. I think a lot of people have made huge contributions of all sorts. Maybe our own small contribution is to help quantify these things and see how they can actually get done in some specifics. We also focus on 3 counties, including Contra Costa County, where the impacts will be disproportionately large. So those are the things I'm going to focus on. I'm not going to talk so much about the getting to zero emissions by 2045 or financing, but we do have a financing framework, and people want to discuss that. Happy to discuss it through the Q&A. Okay, now get this thing. Okay, well, to start off, as you know, California is a leader in the US and globally, actually, in terms of its climate policies. So focusing on 3 main policy goals, a 40% CO2 emission reduction by 2030, emissions-free vehicles by 2035, and carbon neutrality, in other words, net zero or better by 2045. So those are the goals around which we built our study. And the question is, what does it take to get there in terms of investing in building a green energy economy and associated investments in agriculture, land restoration, infrastructure? And once we know what it's going to take to get there, then how many jobs do we get? That's the simple framework. There's a lot of details, but that's basically it. Okay. It's not, okay. Okay, as I said, I'm going to show tables that are coming right out of the study, but obviously I don't expect you to memorize the tables, but it's good to get the general idea. So what we do, first of all, is we ask the question, really, what would it take in terms of transitioning into a clean energy infrastructure for the state of California? And we model this based on cost estimates and so forth. And without going into the details, basically, we focus on 2 areas of investment: investing in energy efficiency and investing in renewable energy, clean renewable energy, and investing in energy efficiency at about $9.3 billion per year. And you can see the areas of investment. And then investing in renewables, solar, onshore wind, low emissions, bioenergy, geothermal, and so forth, okay? And at 66 billion per year. Again, if you want me to tell you how I got that number, I can, but I won't focus on that now. The point is here, we invest in these activities and you get about 300,000 jobs directly and indirectly. Direct meaning the actual activities, such as installing solar panels or putting up wind turbines or investing in a public infrastructure. Those are the direct jobs. Indirect jobs are the supply chain around those direct activities. And what we're looking at here is the supply chain as it is focused in the state of California per se. So we have about 300,000 jobs. Then we add induced jobs. Induced jobs means the number of jobs that get created when the workers have the clean energy jobs. They have more money in their pockets. These are enhancing their living standard, and they spend more money, and that in turn creates ripple effects, more jobs throughout the economy. So we estimate that we're going to get about 418,000 jobs in total, including induced jobs. That amounts to a little over 2% of the California workforce. Okay, now the next question, and this is obviously critical, certainly for any kind of labor mobilization, is we do a lot of work around job quality. That is, you can see the categories we look at: compensation, health insurance, retirement plans, and union membership. Now, the range in terms of job quality is pretty large. So that, for example, if we're looking at jobs in industrial efficiency, the average compensation, including everything, is about $92,000. But in mass transit, it's about $38,000. If we look at solar, it's about $97,000. Whereas in hydro, small scale hydro, it's about 80,000. And we have a range in terms of unionization as well. Now, this is what this is. I'm going to come back to this because we're going to compare it with the fossil fuel jobs. There's a lot of range. On average, the quality is better than the overall labor force, but it is not as good as the fossil fuel labor force, a critical point. But I'm glad to be talking to union organizers. This is an opportunity to organize in these sectors and to raise job quality standards. I know, for example, you just heard from Carol Zabin, and she and her co-authors did an incredibly important report describing ways through which we can raise job quality in California in the clean energy transition. We in this study have documented some of these issues in terms of the jobs that will be created in terms of their existing job quality. It's a snapshot today, today's conditions. The point is to raise job quality. Okay, then we looking at the manufacturing, infrastructure, land restoration, and agricultural jobs, just to really quickly summarize those, from the so-called Thrive Agenda program, we're estimating that you're going to get overall about 626,000 jobs total. So overall, when we combine the investment programs in renewable energy, energy efficiency, infrastructure, land restoration, the overall level of investment is about $138 billion per year. It's about 3.5 or 4% of California's overall level of economic activity, or GDP. And guess what? You get about 1 million jobs. So this is a program to create 1 million more jobs in California. And those jobs will continue over time as long as the investments are made in these areas. And that means you're going to get an increase in employment relative to the existing labor force of about 5.5%. So were we to enact this program in total, and everything else about the economy stayed the same as an assumption, you can go from something like a 7.5% unemployment rate to a 2% unemployment rate. Effectively, this becomes a full employment agenda that also tackles our climate emergency, and it also addresses issues of advancing manufacturing and public infrastructure. Okay, I said that I'm going to talk about the transition for the fossil fuel industry. And I know very, very well, this is a serious matter. It is a matter that unions have been focused on for a long time. We have to confront it openly. Okay, according to our estimates, there's about 112,000 people employed at present, or at least according to the most recent data, employed in these various sectors of the fossil fuel industry in California. And you can see the sectors: natural gas distribution, oil and gas extraction, petroleum refining, support activities for oil and gas, and so forth. So if we are talking about these jobs, which represent, it's not a lot percentage-wise, but these are real people's jobs. It's about 0.6% of all the jobs. And if we're saying we're going to get, talking about to 2030, we're going to get to something like a 40 to 50% reduction in emissions, that also means you're going to have to mean 40 to 50% contraction in employment. That's what it means. So we have to deal with that and talk about how we implement a really robust and just transition. Okay, now we saw the characteristics of workers in the fossil fuel-based sectors, and here they are, and we saw them in the renewable energy and energy efficiency. The jobs are better on average, not every single one, of course, but on average, compensation, including everything, is higher, health insurance, wider representation, better retirement benefits, and higher union membership. These are facts. But again, this is a snapshot today. The fossil fuel-based jobs did not start out as good jobs. People didn't think about working in a refinery or working, for that matter, in a coal mine as a good job. They became good jobs because people organized to make them good jobs, because people like you, labor organizers, committed people, made them good jobs. And that's exactly the challenge that we face in the clean energy transition. In addition to which, we have to make sure that the transition is viable for these 120,000 people, their communities, and their families. Okay, so what do we think in terms of a policy package for workers that will be displaced as California phases out its fossil fuel-based industries? We have these 5 basic areas that constitute this, what we call a just transition program. So pension guarantees for workers, employment guarantees, somebody spoke to that before. In other words, if you're displaced, if your fossil fuel job is displaced, you're guaranteed another job. It could be another job in the clean energy area or the infrastructure area. It doesn't have to be, but there are obviously, if we're generating 1 million jobs in those sectors, there will be huge opportunities. The jobs right now in the clean energy and agriculture and infrastructure pay less on average, so that we guarantee not just a job guarantee, but wage insurance. You get your same wage at least in transitioning to your new job. If you need retraining, 2 years of retraining guaranteed. If you need relocation support, not assuming that people will need relocation support. In fact, it's preferable that they not. I'll come back to that in a minute. But if they need it, it's there. We estimated at $75,000 per worker. Okay, now how many workers are going to require this level of support? That's a really critical question, because you see the big number, 112,000 workers, but they're not all going to get laid off right away. Even if you get to a zero emissions, zero fossil fuel economy by 2045, you are not going to lay off everybody now. They are going to be phased out over a long period between now and 2045. So what we do in this exercise is we look at the 10-year period from getting to 2030. So, and we assume that we are going to reduce emissions by about half, which means we're going to reduce fossil fuel activity by about half, okay? So that turns out to be about 5,700 people per year. So it's not 112,000 getting laid off every year. It's 5,755 people, jobs that are getting contracted. But then we also looked at the demographics of the labor force. And we assume that people turning 65 about any time over this 10-year period, about 80% of them are going to voluntarily retire. So that we are actually getting, there's about 5,800 jobs that are contracting, but of that 5,800, About 2,500 are going to be workers voluntarily retiring. So that you can see from this figure, the job loss is about 5,800, voluntary retirements, about 2,500, and then there are going to be 3,200 people whose jobs are going to be displaced. And those 3,200 people are the ones we focus on every year. The Just Transition Program has to be focused on getting these people back into good situations, at least as good as the ones that they have when their jobs get phased out. So again, a big table with a lot of numbers. You don't need to go through it, obviously, but I just want to show you that we're very careful in estimating for these 3,200 workers the costs of their income support, retraining support, relocation support, and we total it all up. And what it averages out to is about $470 million per year. Okay, that's for all the workers. That's for all 3,200 workers, 3,200 workers per year. And they're all going to get the benefits that we talked about, that I talked about just before. And that's going to be real money, as it should be. It's a little less than $500 million a year, real money. Now, but keep in mind that that $500 million a year is real money, but it also is less than 0.02% of California's GDP. So in compared to the overall economy in California, treating these 3,200 workers as they deserve with a just transition, the monetary costs are peanuts. We have to focus on that. I've done studies in other states around this. We get similar results. I'll mention in Colorado, we did a study 2 years ago, at least in part on the basis of our study. The state did introduce a program, an Office of Just Transition, focused on getting workers who are facing displacement into good situations. It can be done easily. It's critical, I think, it's critical that we emphasize that, yes, it's $500 million, but $500 million is a drop in the bucket, especially when we're dealing with the well-being of people and communities. Okay, I'll just also mention the $500 million estimate or thereabouts depends on policy introducing this phase down of fossil fuels in a steady way. If you don't do it in a steady way, if it becomes like plants just closing down without planning, just announcing we're laying off 700 workers, and I know such things are happening now, and it becomes these episodic layoffs, then it's going to cost more because you can't get the benefit of phasing out the workers who are going to face retirement in a steady way. So that jacks up the cost. It does. As you can see, we go from 469 million to 833 million. It's an additional 363 million based on not investing in policies to introduce a steady phase out. That said, even the 832 million per year is less than 0.04% of state GDP. So it's a bad policy to rely on these episodes of massive layoffs as opposed to a steady planned contraction. But even if you are faced with episodes, the state can easily afford giving workers the benefits that they need in transition. Okay, finally, as I mentioned, we do focus on 3 counties in California, including Contra Costa, because those 3 counties have the highest proportion of fossil fuel employment. So you can see from these graphs, the largest number of employees in the fossil fuel industry are in LA County with 26%. But because LA County is so big, it's a very small proportion of overall statewide, of over countywide employment. But in Kern and Contra Costa, the share of the county employment is relatively large, 3.2% in Kern, 2.2% in Contra Costa. And so one of the things we advocate for as part of the Just Transition is for these counties to also get a disproportionate share of the investments in clean energy, in infrastructure, in restorative agriculture, and therefore enhancing the opportunities within those counties as the state moves into this transition to a green economy. So those are the basic features of the model. And again, the whole point of this is not to like toss zillions of numbers your way, but to get you to give you some support in the important work you're doing in organizing to do the things that you're talking about. Climate, labor convergence, showing how advancing a Green New Deal, a green transition is fully compatible with raising living standards for workers and communities and supporting the workers in the fossil fuel industry that are going to inevitably face transition. Thanks, I'll stop there.
We're on a roll where people are stopping themselves. I guess this is awesome. So, okay, I know we have a lot of questions for you. So why don't we get started? The first one will go to Ernie and then Tim after you. So Tim, just hold on, but Ernie, go ahead, brother. You got you unmuted.
Well, actually, Josh, my question had been for the previous panel where I was asking our Enviro and EJ partners if they would line up behind us on this plan by labor for labor to do a just transition. So it was actually for the previous panel.
Well, shucks. I'm sorry about that, Ernie. I figured you were for this. So I'm gonna keep moving then. Tim. And you got some answers there, Ernie. Tim.
Hi, Pollin. Thanks, Josh. Ms. Pollin, my curious, we said 40% of the jobs that would be lost or phased out. And then you given those counties, I mean, to me, those are Black and brown communities. I don't think those jobs are, I mean, it seemed like, like they were just an afterthought. Like, I mean, like it's okay that that's a loss. That's not a loss. I mean, that's not okay that that's a loss. What do we, I mean, it's, I guess that I see that the last chart you showed there that had the counties broken down, and in my particular county was Contra Costa County there. I understand that, but it just seems like those 40% it's just like it's a accepted casualty, I guess, is what I'm looking at. What my question is it?
No, well, I mean, the thing that we're trying to focus on, and I'm sorry if I wasn't clear enough, was focusing on just transition for all the workers in the state. It doesn't matter what county they're in. The reason I focused on Kern and Contra Costa is because the impact is going to be relatively large within the county, and that therefore investments in the clean energy transition should also be proportionally larger. That said, you know, all 3,200 workers per year, wherever they are in the state, it doesn't matter, wherever they are should have the exact same just transition benefits that they would have whether they're in Contra Costa or Kern County. So the just transition applies across the state, and by no means was I suggesting that that's an acceptable loss. There is a transition. It's going to happen. It has to happen, but that the just transition component of the program has to be central. And that's what I see as what I would call the Green New Deal would include the just transition right up there with everything else as a central feature of the program.
If I could ask another question, is that possible?
Follow up, sure, go ahead, Tim.
Well, it's about the 2-year portion of the training portion. The Boilermakers go through a 4-year, 6,000-year apprenticeship program. After the 2 years, then how does, I mean, what would the workers transition into then? Is that an acceptable training program? Is that how you see that?
So, what I was working off was, averages. I looked at training programs in California and elsewhere, and not just for, Boilermakers, but obviously this is, I'm dealing in an overall framework, and each feature of the overall framework doesn't necessarily apply exactly specifically to every worker under every set of circumstances. And if I were drafting legislation that would be implemented, such as in the case of Colorado, where they now have an Office of Just Transition and they can deal case by case with every given situation. I mean, that I couldn't do in a study that's so broad.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, we're gonna keep on moving here. So I got another question. Things people move their hands down. So hold on 1 second here and I will get them all. Why don't we go to this Norman Rogers? There you go, Norman.
Yeah, question about how the pension guarantees work. As you might guess, I'm towards the end of my career, so that holds particular interest.
I imagine so.
Yeah. So, in my view, and the work research I've done on this, is that the pension guarantees can be implemented on the basis of financial regulation. In other words, for example, if you look at the study, we look at the conditions of pensions for as many of the companies that we could get data on, the pension for all the public corporations that report pensions. So, in fact, the pensions are in pretty good shape now. So the regulation would have to say, look, the condition of the pension fund has to be maintained over time. In other words, the companies are not allowed to, for example, distribute dividends. They're not allowed to engage in stock buybacks. They have to maintain the viability of the workers' pension. And that's going to be based on regulation. Now, let's say that the companies somehow don't do this, that they violate the law and they therefore, let's just say that.
Okay, I like your laughter, but
okay. We do have a model.
I gotcha.
Yeah?
Yeah, I muted him. You're good. I muted you. Hold on, you're muted. Hold on. How did you get muted? I don't understand how you got muted. I didn't mute you. Someone else. All right, well, there you go.
We did have the Power Plus program that was introduced under Obama for the coal industry, where the pension funds are not in good shape. And, as a last resort, the government was committed to guaranteeing the pensions of the coal miners. Now, that bill didn't pass in Congress, ironically, because Mitch McConnell didn't want it to pass, even though he's from Kentucky, and it would benefit workers in his state more than almost every other state. So that's my fallback position. But the first position is we can't let the companies speculate and gamble on the workers' pension funds. They have to be maintained.
And I know we're running late, so I got one question in the chat, and I know there's people with their hands raised, and I apologize. Like, we were supposed to end around this time, but we still have another presentation. So I have one question how many of these 1 million jobs are will be based in Bay Area communities that you spoke of? I got that from EJ from Sheet Metal Workers 104. So you talked about the 1 million jobs there, right? Any thoughts on that to answer EJ's question?
So, I didn't do this exactly region by region. I did do it, as I said, for the 3 counties that are going to be disproportionately impacted. The general idea was that the investments would be spread pretty evenly across the state, other than in these areas that are heavily impacted. So that, whatever the share of the labor force that's in Northern California now, roughly speaking, would be commensurate. It just would be that you would have an expansion of employment throughout the state.
Perfect. Okay, I know there was more questions, but I know we got to keep moving. Dr. Pollin, thank you so much. And if anyone's interested in the report, I know they can search, I think they actually had it in the chat. People linked it. So if anyone's interested in reading the report, there it is. And I really appreciate you coming and joining us. And we'll be seeing you soon.
Okay, well. Thanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know it's a late night. You're all staying with us. I really appreciate that. It's been a fun, interesting evening. We're not done yet. You think we're done, but we're not. Haha. So next up, I am so excited about our presentation. I was trying to find ways to even move this up, but so it goes. The next person will be Tim Frank. So our presenter on this segment is about smart growth. something that we need to be thinking about. And Tim Frank is the executive director of the Center for Sustainable Neighborhoods. And he's worked with decades for both labor and environmental movements, and now be presenting to you all about the future of sustainable growth, about city planning and so forth. So I'm not going to talk anymore. Tim, if you're there, why don't you come on the screen and we can talk about smart growth.
Terrific. Can you see me?
I can't yet, but I can hear you. That's step one. Let me help you get your camera on.
Yeah, it's telling me that it needs you to.
Oh, there you are. You're still, now you're just in a black void.
Oh,
your camera's up. There you go. I understand you don't want Big Brother seeing you all the time. I
Yeah,
do
the last little detail. I have to tell you, I borrowed that from Mark Zuckerberg. He puts
Me too. The moment I saw he had tape on his computer was the moment I started doing that too.
Yes.
Anyway, enough of us just yapping. I'm going to go on mute, and the floor is.
So thank you. So I've been working in the area of smart growth for about 25 years or so. I got my start with the Sierra Club. I served for a good number of years as chair of the Sierra Club's National Challenge to Sprawl campaign, which worked to try and stop sprawl, but also at the same time to promote its opposite, which is smart growth, which is sort of the positive spin on economic development. It's what we can agree on, what we are actually for. It's a way for environmentalists to actually be in favor of economic growth and to be demanding about whether it be equitable and environmentally sustainable. For about 20 years, I've also served as on the board of Good Jobs First, which is a DC-based think tank that works on economic development reform and smart growth for working families. And I believe many of you probably are familiar with Good Jobs First work. And I'm going to show you a publication of theirs shortly. And it's been a wild ride for me, a really interesting opportunity to collaborate with labor in a really serious way. And for about the last 14 years, I've served as the executive director for the Center for Sustainable Neighborhoods. And we support policies and projects that help build sustainable neighborhoods and regions. And we've been very deliberate about partnering specifically with labor and especially with the building trades. And I actually serve as a consultant now to a number of building trades councils around how to make sure that smart growth is good union-friendly growth. So about 20 years ago, I did something that was kind of exciting in a different state, in the state of Colorado. I had done a bunch of work with the building trades in California. I was working as a lobbyist for Sierra Club California, and I had a great relationship with Bob Balganorth, who's the head of this, who was at that time the head of the State Building and Construction Trades Council. And in the year 2000, the Sierra Club had put a ballot measure on the ballot in Colorado to establish an urban growth boundary around the Denver metro area. And the building trades came out against that measure, and the measure went down in defeat. The trades actually did a good job with their politicking, and they succeeded and they killed the measure. And in the aftermath of that, Ellen Gollenbeck, who was then the head of the Colorado Federation of Labor, wanted to see if she could broker a conversation between organized labor and the environmental community about how they could work on the same side. And she invited a number of people to come back and actually work with an assembled group of environmental leaders and labor leaders from Colorado. And I represented the Sierra Club, and Bob Balganorth represented the California building trades. And we talked to them about how we were working together in California. And we worked with this group. And at the end of a very long day, we actually came up with a set of initial agreements that led to organized labor and the environmental community in Colorado working to put two ballot measures on the ballot that were ultimately on the 2004 ballot. And one of those actually established Colorado's renewable portfolio. So that committed the state of Colorado to beginning to build utility scale renewables. And the other was a ballot measure that funded the establishment of the Denver rail transit network. So what's really interesting about this is these are kind of two key pieces that you see now in the Green New Deal. And they had labor standards on them, and they've been a terrific success in the state of Colorado. The fast tracks not only provided a huge amount of union labor, building out the new rail transit system, but then spurred a great deal of smart growth, which was transit-oriented development, intensive, complex projects in the downtown and around these transit stations, which is exactly the kind of work where the unions actually are more likely to get to work, and they have been. So it changed the pattern of development in the Denver metro area significantly to the benefit of both the environment and the building trades. And I would argue, and you're going to find out a little bit about this, about why, that it was actually good for the overall union movement, every sector. So I actually have a bit of a presentation that's going to show you. Here we go. Now I just need to share a screen. Share screen. Beautiful. Excellent. Okay. Now I just have to figure out how to operate this. So to start with, I wanted to actually say something about the broader context in which we're doing this work. I started out my career thinking I wanted to work on making the American economy sustainable. I thought that the key to making to protecting the environment was to figure out how to make it profitable to do so. And I got a degree in economics, and then I've been working in environmental policy ever since. But it wasn't very long after I got out of college that I recognized that we needed to do more than just figure out how to make it profitable to do right by the environment, that we had to solve our social justice issues too. And America is a really challenging place to do all of this. We use more land, more energy, more building materials per capita than other rich industrialized nations. We have more poverty and less social housing than other rich countries. And all of this has been driven by politics that dates back as far as a century. Where we have taken a path that is divergent from the path that other wealthy countries and wealthy capitalist countries have taken. So we're an unusual place that has a lot of income inequality, that uses resources very inefficiently, and that has created an enormous amount of social inequity. And it's by and large driven by policy. It isn't just a lightly regulated capitalist country just doing what capitalism would do. We heavily regulated in a particular way that deliberately created segregation, that deliberately created sprawl. And at the same time, by limiting the strength of labor rules, we created an enormous amount, an unnecessarily large amount of poverty. And when you put poverty and this segregation together, you get this toxic mix. It's actually terrible for low-income people, but it's actually bad for the overall economy. We have higher cyclic, higher, more aggressive economic cycles, which means that you have big highs and then very low lows. And when you have a deep recession, it's very damaging to the overall economy. So the opportunity here is to think bigger when we look at the challenge of a just transition and try to figure out how we can solve the whole problem. But looking at America's unique zoning environment that currently requires segregation, and instead look at creating more mixed income neighborhoods by fixing housing policy, which has too little affordable housing and needs more. We actually have some of the lowest rates of investment in social housing of all the OECD countries. And if we want a more just society, we're going to need to invest a great deal more in affordable housing. And if we do that right, we can create good union jobs while doing it. We need to shift our transportation policy. For years after World War II, we invested almost entirely in highways and not at all in transit. And we need to shift that. And finally, we need to fix labor policy. So we've had bad labor rules ever since Taft-Hartley took the wind out of the sails of the labor movement in 1947. And it's only gotten worse since. And we need to fix that so that we can have a stronger middle income economy. So here's just a few of the things that we did to create the current mess. You know, in 1928, Hoover introduced these zoning codes that were adopted all over the country. All 50 states now actually are dominated by single family zoning. And this is really uniquely American. There's no other country on earth that actually has devoted huge amounts of residential land where it's illegal to build a duplex, let alone a small scale apartment. Only America does this. And yet it's 70% of the residentially zoned land in America and the majority of the residentially zoned land in all 50 states. It's just amazing. So it's this uniquely American problem that we need to fix. So if you look at this from an environmental perspective, looking at this just from a climate change perspective, you look at the comparison between suburban development and urban development, and you find there's this huge difference in the amount of CO2 emissions. And ordinary people would think that the image on the left is actually more sustainable, but it's not. In fact, the image on the right, the more intensively developed parcel, is actually the way more sustainable land use. And you can see down at the bottom, just measured in terms of CO2 pounds per household, the tremendous advantages that urban density provides. And it isn't just greenhouse gas emissions, it's all these other environmental inputs. It's all the materials for pipe and wiring and lumber, et cetera. And then it's also the amount of land that we use. So this is the reason why America uses 4 times as much land as Europe does on a per capita basis for urbanization. So if we want to grow more smartly, we can save a lot of farmland. We can also create communities that are healthier places to live. This little graph shows you just how unique America is. America is here on the left, and then here's all these other countries. And what we're actually looking at here is obesity is the red line, and then walk, bike, cycle, and transit is the green line. So what you see is all these other countries are actually places where we have neighborhoods that are great places to walk, bike, and cycle. And in America, we make everybody drive to do everything. And it turns out that being a couch potato who drives everywhere is bad for your health. And the interesting thing about this is that it isn't just low-income people who suffer. High-income people who live in neighborhoods that were green-lined during the era of redlining have neighborhoods that are unwalkable, because the way we made them segregated is by requiring large lots for every single home. So as we go about trying to figure out how to build a more sustainable economy, environmentalists can honor these principles. Let's fix the labor problem and let's fix the housing problem. So this policy right here is actually drawn from the Sierra Club's new infill development policy. And it shows you how good environmentalists can be as allies for the labor movement. So the top one shows you what they said about all infill development. It should honor and support the right to organize and promote quality union jobs and livable wages for both construction work and the permanent jobs that follow. So if we do this and we think about economy-wide what we can do, what we're building, and we have environmental allies asking to ensure that all construction work is union work, all the hotels are union work, all the restaurants are union work, that's a way to begin to create a middle wage economy. And if we want to take our, all our segregated neighborhoods and fill them with affordable housing, well, that's going to take a lot of investment. And if we do that right, it will not only let people make decisions about how to live in inclusive communities, but it will also create a whole lot more union construction. It could, but it won't necessarily. We have to pay attention to the details, because right now in America, the biggest affordable housing funding programs are the low-income housing tax credits, which don't actually require good union labor. They don't trigger Davis-Bacon. So that's something that we need to fix. And this is the key to actually making smart growth work for everybody, is that we need to actually tend to all the details and attach the appropriate labor standards to everything. So that we need to attach labor standards to the low-income housing tax credit at the federal level, and we need to attach labor standards to the low-income housing tax credit here in California. So this is a primer on the benefits of urban development for the building trades, and very specific. This is a report that was produced back in 2003. It did a very rigorous job of analyzing investments in public infrastructure and looking at the implications for the development that would follow, specifically from the perspective of the building trades, and found that all of the suite of strategies that the environmentalists were promoting to promote smart growth, including when it comes to highway construction, a fix it first agenda, as opposed to building new lane miles, and a greater investment in transit, that these actually produce more work hours for construction work hours. And that when the work is done in an urban environment, it's more likely to be union work. But better than that, when you put all that infrastructure in place, and you're building in an infill setting, and you're building transit, and you're fixing your roads and bridges, but also not extending new lane miles out into the middle of nowhere to support sprawl, but instead focusing on infill development and the infrastructure that will support infill development, you get more work hours in the in the development that follows the infrastructure, the residential and commercial infrastructure. And in that construction that is located in the areas of highest density is where you're most likely to actually get union work doing the work. So what it means is that for the building trades, smart growth is an extraordinarily good deal. But here's the really cool thing, is if you look at urban density and overall union density, you find this incredible consistency, because it's the building trades that do best in the urban centers. It's the hospitals that do best in the urban centers. Public employees are more likely to be unionized in the urban centers, etc. Unions are fundamentally city-oriented institutions. And so this is an opportunity to align the building trades and the service sector, the manufacturing sector, everybody on an agenda that's good for the environment. So this is an example of how we actually make it work. This is the Bay Meadows racetrack. It's a horse racing track in San Mateo County that basically went out of business, and it got redeveloped. And environmentalists and affordable housing advocates and labor collaborated and worked together on negotiating in concert with the developer a community benefits agreement on this. It's an 85-acre parcel, and this kind of one-stop shopping where the developer negotiated with a consortium of groups that were working together in concert and supporting each other. So the building trades were supporting the affordable housing requirements, and environmentalists were supporting a project labor agreement, and it all worked out really beautifully. So here's the specific plan that actually got completed: 85 acres, 1,250 homes, of which 190 were affordable, $1.25 million or square feet of commercial development, all of it built, 15 acres of open space. And there were several different parks distributed through here, and it addressed the park shortcoming of the community. The environmentalist said, this is what we need, and the developer said, we'll give it to you. And they did, and the result is actually a beautiful project. And here it is under construction. And it's all being done under a project labor agreement. So basically, this is union labor. Berkeley, downtown, we actually have a specific plan for the downtown that allows buildings to be built now to 180 feet. Now, Berkeley, just a generation ago, was the community that was just famous for being just say no. where they wouldn't allow any building. So between 1973 and about the year 2000, Berkeley built just 400 homes total. They basically shut down everything in 1973. And with the downtown specific plan, which we put on the ballot, and it was labor, environmentalists, and the Chamber of Commerce and developers all working together, we got a downtown that allows substantial density, but it has community benefits associated with it. So there's contributions to affordable housing. There's union requirements on all of the tall buildings. So this building here that you see is this is the artist rendering of a hotel that basically is going to be all union built and union staff, because Unite here has a card check agreement on it. And here it is under construction. So that's what we want to see. This is policy at work, and it's a coalition that delivered it. Now, this is just across the street and just down the way, also in Berkeley, 300 units of housing, also about 180 feet tall, over ground floor retail, with a $10 million contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Once again, a product of good policy. Now, smart growth is not just an urban center thing. This is an example from Ramona, which is just outside of San Diego. And this is existing conditions, and I'm going to show you a sequence of slides that make it smarter. Now, I should note that this right here is a picture that was actually included in the San Diego regional plan. So the same plan that is now associated with the project labor agreement. And here is what we do. So we add street trees, and you just added a bike lane there, you see. Right over here, this bike lane, that's an example of infrastructure that would be covered by the project labor agreement. And then you add a bunch of new development along both sides of the street to create a more, a denser format. And what you see is this, there's not big front and side and backyard setbacks. It's not sprawl-like. Instead, this is actually a continuous curtain along the street front. And it's beautiful. It looks a lot like a historic Main Street. So that's what we can do in San Diego with a project labor agreement. Here's Marin County, and another example of a slide sequence created by Steve Price, who is a national treasure. He's an amazing guy who's produced these sequences of slides for planners all over the country. So here's what we can do in Marin County. You add your trees, and then you add all your smart growth around it. And it's beautiful. There's no reason why we can't create beautiful, denser development that is much more walkable and do it using union labor. And if we want to use union labor, what we need is policy. And so I have one other thing I want to share with you. This is a group of environmental groups that actually signed on, sent a letter to MTC, and you'll see who they are. It's Rails to Trails Conservancy, the Alameda County Resource Conservation District, Save the Bay, the Climate Center, this Committee for a Green Foothills, the Center for Sustainable Neighborhoods, and the Greenbelt Alliance. And Igor told you that the Sierra Club would love to actually join in this group as well. And this is, if you scroll down here and you look at the bottom of the page, the second page.
I'm not seeing the same images, Tim.
Prioritize skilled and trained labor. See, they're actually embracing they're embracing the, you can see this. Can you see that?
I can see no, I can just see like all your PowerPoint, like basically.
It's just my PowerPoint. Oh,
yeah.
Whoops. I know what I mean. I need to share this other item. Well, that's all right.
Seems fun, right?
Yeah, so I'll just tell you, I was trying to show you a letter that had a bunch of logos from all these environmental groups on top, and it had a very nice paragraph in it about the labor standards. It was lifted directly from the building trades. And this is the kind of partnership that we need. This is how we actually make policy happen.
Well, it's a bummer you couldn't see it, but still was an awesome presentation. See if you can like unshare your screen and then reshare it on that thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna do that.
Cool. And as you do that, I'm gonna take a moment. Look, it's 8:43. We've been going almost for 4 hours. I don't want to think about all the energy we've used from all our computers to do this, but okay, show us the thing.
Yeah, okay, so at the top, you see all these nice logos, all our friends, labor and environmental friends. We just love it. And then you look at the bottom of the second page, prioritize skilled and trained labor. Publicly funded transportation, housing, and environmental projects called for in the plan should use apprentices and skilled and trained journey level workers for all construction work. And that tells you why it's good. And it's good for the environment and good for equity. So that's what we're looking for. So I think I'm ready for questions.
Okay, let's do that. Let's get a few questions. If you would like to ask a question, we can do this two ways. We can either, you can raise your hand like Tim was just showing you. You can raise your hand. I can call on you that way. Or you can put something into the chat. So let me see if we have any questions. Oh, good. We have your hand raised. Hold on here and I will get that. Peter Shapiro. There you go, brother. The floor is yours for the question. Once you unmute, sir. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Okay.
There you go.
So there's a lot of construction going on in Oakland right now. I mean, a ton of it, but affordable housing still lags way, way behind. How do we account for this? And what is the role of real estate speculation by private equity firms in Wall Street in driving the housing market in California? Because somebody mentioned NIMBYism earlier in the conference. I have a feeling that has a lot less to do with it than the fact that there's a ton of money pouring in right now and it's all speculation. It's driving prices way up. That's my question.
Well, so first there's a couple of things. Affordable housing is a critical element of smart growth. And in Oakland, they have, if we want to make sure, if we want to deliver affordable housing, we need three things. We need public financing for it. We need zoning that actually can accommodate housing that is built relatively efficiently. That's essentially affordability by design. And then finally, we need some inclusionary zoning that actually makes sure that that market rate developers are contributing their fair share to building affordable housing. Now, you can't actually ask the market rate developers to do the whole big lift of making housing affordable for everybody, because they can't compensate for the fact that Walmart's paying crappy wages, that that most janitors make very low wages, etc. We need higher minimum wages. We need a whole slew of strategies to try and raise wages in the rest of the economy too. The housing construction field can't do it all by itself, but it can do something, and we should be asking for something everywhere. So every community that doesn't have an inclusionary requirement needs one. In Alameda, we also have the county has a affordable housing bond measure, Measure A, that happens to have a project labor agreement that's contributing to it. Oakland doesn't have its own specific affordable housing funding mechanism, but other communities do. Berkeley, for instance, has Measure U1 that the building trade supported, that actually is a business license tax that applies to rental housing, and it uses all of the proceeds from that to build affordable housing. And on top of that, it has a bond measure that's paid for by property taxes, and that's also used to pay for affordable housing. That also happens to have labor standards associated with it, which is the package we're looking for. So we need all of these things working together. It's going to be a big lift, and we need local, state, and federal policy to line up on this, because we need funding from every different level to actually give us the kind of funds we need. We're starting from a bad place, remember. For almost 100 years, our country has invested less in social housing than any other advanced country on the planet. So we've got a lot of ground to make up from, and it's going to take a big amount of public investment to succeed at that.
So I got some more questions for you. That was number one. This was supposed to be Contra Costa and Alameda, but we attracted the whole state, and I'm going to turn this over for the next question to my brother from San Diego. I just put him on the spot to embarrass him. Rick Bates. So Rick, I'm gonna allow you to talk.
All right, thanks. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. All right, perfect. Josh, it's good to see you again, brother. Tim, this is great information. Love the all the conversation on smart growth, infill development. Everything you said makes a lot of sense down in San Diego. The building trades, along with Unite here, kind of been at the forefront of trying to improve inclusionary requirements on those sorts of ordinances within the city. But what we're finding is that a lot of times developers try to like break apart different parts of the building trades maybe to get them to support sprawl development in a way where, you know, they go out and they buy, you know, a developer will get a chunk of land that's very inexpensive because it's not zoned for housing. And so they buy it on the cheap. They get a general plan amendment, they upzone it, suddenly becomes worth something, they build on it, and they might peel off a union or two. Just kind of curious, do you have any thoughts on that? Is that something that you see that's kind of, it happens a lot? Or do you have any thoughts on how we can, you know, maybe be prepared for that kind of thing, or try to figure out how to fight against it?
Well, I think it's important to try and fight against that. I actually think that there's some real integrity to the regional plan in San Diego, and sticking to that program is, I think, the key way to go. And what we really need to try and do is see if we can't align all of the trades working together. And this is both the AFL-CIO unions and the non-AFL unions. So, for instance, if you look at who was testifying on behalf of that project labor agreement for Sandag, it was basically all the building trades, including the carpenters. This is the absolute way to go. We need solidarity that is complete within the union movement around this stuff. If we work together, we can actually do a lot. And the union, the building trades are going to be better off if there's some discipline to the development process, and if more development is focused in the urban centers and around good around transit and it's smart growth in flavor. If you look at the relatively light intensity development that is happening out on the periphery, it actually doesn't involve as many work hours for us as the more complex, denser stuff that you get in with more smart growth. So I think that the discipline is actually really important. So yeah, I don't know how to stop the one-off things out there other than through policy, and it's through these regional policies that we succeed. And so we need to basically work on general plans, and we need to work on regional plans with all hands on deck, making sure that the unions are getting a good deal out of it. I mean, right now, one of the problems, if you're looking at the residential sector, is that almost nobody's getting much of the work anywhere. It isn't union work. The residential sector is the worst sector in the entire construction economy. They've been union busting in California since 1980, and they've done a very good job about it. The developers have, and it's a real problem. We need to fix that. But I'm convinced that we can establish a fix through policy and working with both general plans and with regional plans and with state lawmakers to find solutions that provide union friendly policies that are attached to smart growth policies.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, I want you to have more questions to answer, but look, we're at 8:52, and I think I'm going to bring our sustainable, eco-friendly plane into a landing at our newly built PLA invisible airport that is made up here. So everyone, tonight was, Tim, thank you so much, by the way. Thank you so much for your presentation and your patience for being here. And I know we already had you last, and I'm really sorry about that. However, all of this done tonight, because we almost were here for 4 hours together. This was amazing. And all of you stuck with us on this. So before we wrap up, I want to say one little quick thing. And I'm going to turn this over to other people. You don't have to hear me talk after this. This was not made in a vacuum. This was not made just tonight. We didn't just call these people and say, hey, get on a Zoom tonight. This was made by hard work and dedication and volunteer hours, blood, sweat, and tears by so many people. I couldn't even thank them all. But I want to say this was done by our climate caucuses. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to turn this over to our climate caucus chairs to talk more of this. But real fast, I just want to thank everyone, Glenn, Amy, there's too many names, Michael, all the staff at the Contra Costa and at the Alameda Labor Councils, everybody that was involved with this, Vivian, everybody, thank you all for making this happen. With that, I'm gonna turn this over to Glenn and Amee, and thank you all.
Go ahead, Amee.
Okay, great. Thanks. I want to thank everyone for coming. This has been great. We've put a lot of energy and time into doing this because it's such an important topic. I also wanted to say real quick to Norman Rogers earlier, you said something about hope. And I just wanted to say that I think a great deal of the reason why many people have gotten involved with this is because we have hope. And I think that our possibilities of being able to get things done that work on union density, excellent jobs, and clean air, and a healthy climate all come by all of us coming together as the people affected, as the people working on it. And so I'd like to put a big invite out to anybody who'd like to join our climate caucus. We have one in the Contra Costa Labor Council and also at Alameda. Glenn, you want to say something about the times, et cetera?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Glenn Laval, political coordinator of the Iron Workers Union Local 378 and a co-chair of both the Alameda and the Contra Costa Central Labor Council's climate caucuses. As you have seen this evening, workers from across the entire labor movement have spoken up for their needs and interest for a sustainable pro-worker future. Labor must work together to uplift workers from all parts of the movement. The time to work together is now, to find a unified front in the combined struggles to overcome climate change and to create a stronger labor movement and a more equitable future. To all community partners, thank you for being in this conversation, and we look forward to further dialogue. To all labor delegates, please get involved in these climate caucuses. The Alameda Climate Caucus will convene next Tuesday, August 2nd at 5:30 p.m. on Zoom, and the Contra Costa County Climate Caucus will convene on Wednesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. also on Zoom. For more information and reminders, please reach out to your local labor councils. On behalf of both climate caucuses, the Alameda and Contra Costa Central Labor Councils, and to all participating unions in this effort, thank you, and we will see you all on the front lines.
Okay, now this is going to be on YouTube, so we'll get the links out to everyone. We're going to figure out how to do that. And Zilali, you want to take us out?
Sure. So thank you all to our presenters for joining and those who attended this evening. Really appreciate you staying on. And again, for those who weren't able to stay on or joined in the middle or towards the end, we will have that video up on YouTube and more information to come. Again, just a reminder, our next meeting for the Climate Caucus is August 2nd at 5:30 p.m. on Zoom. So keep an eye out for an email with more information on our Climate Caucus and partnering organizations. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Hey, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, everybody. Have a good night and be safe. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Good night, y'all.
Hey, Joe, I think you're the host, so you got to end it. I can't end it. I can just leave it.
I'm ending it. Don't worry about it.
I'm just letting you know. I'm just saying. We're awkwardly waiting for someone to end it.